In the early 19th century, amidst the quiet woods and bustling streets of Concord, Massachusetts, a figure emerged who would leave an indelible mark on American thought. Henry David Thoreau, born in 1817, was a writer, philosopher, and naturalist whose life would unfold as a testament to simplicity, nature, and the pursuit of a deeper understanding of the human condition. His world was one of quiet reflection and profound observation, where the everyday rhythms of life were met with careful introspection. Thoreau's influence, though often subtle, has shaped the course of American intellectual history. Through his seminal works, such as Walden and Civil Disobedience, he would challenge the norms of his time and encourage generations to consider the value of living deliberately and with purpose. His ideas on nature, individualism, and resistance to oppression have become foundational in American literature and thought, reverberating across the years. As we embark on this gentle exploration of Thoreau's life, let the slow unfolding of his journey through the woods, the pages of his journals, and his contemplative solitude guide you. Each chapter will carry us through the quiet moments that defined his existence, without haste or interruption. Together we will drift through the story of his life, like a slow current, meandering through the forests of Concord, where nature and reflection coexist in quiet harmony. If you are enjoying this peaceful exploration, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing where you're watching from. Now we begin the journey through the life of Henry David Thoreau, a life that invites us to pause, reflect, and appreciate the simplicity of being. Henry David Thoreau was born on July 12, 1817, in the small, quiet town of Concord, Massachusetts. Concord, with its shaded woods and gently flowing rivers, would become more than just the place of his birth. It would be the landscape that nurtured his thoughts, shaped his writing, and served as his retreat from the rapidly changing world around him. His father, John Thoreau, was a modest pencil maker, and his mother, Cynthia Dunbar Thoreau, came from a family of farmers. The Thoreau family was not wealthy by the standards of their time, but they were rich in intellectual curiosity and a deep appreciation for nature. From the very beginning, Thoreau's life was entwined with the rhythms of Concord. The town, located just outside of Boston, was at the crossroads of New England's intellectual and philosophical movements. It was here, in the gentle embrace of nature and surrounded by a community of thinkers, that Thoreau would develop his love for the natural world, his literary sensibilities, and his beliefs about the nature of life itself. As a child, Thoreau was observant and thoughtful. His early years were marked by a quiet curiosity about the world around him. He was known for his ability to sit still for long periods, watching the world without rushing to interpret it. This patience, this attentiveness to nature, would be a hallmark of his character for the rest of his life. It was not so much the events of his childhood that shaped him, but rather the stillness, the space to reflect, and the time to watch and wonder. Thoreau was educated in the public schools of Concord, and his teachers recognized early on that he had a special intellect. At the age of 16, he entered Harvard College, where he would experience the world outside of Concord for the first time. Harvard, with its classical education and its growing emphasis on intellectual rigor, was an important turning point in Thoreau's development, but it was also a place that would set him apart from many of his peers. He did not fit neatly into the mold of a conventional student, and his resistance to the prescribed ways of thinking would become a defining feature of his adult life. At Harvard, Thoreau was known for his independent thinking. He was not one to follow the popular ideas of the time, preferring instead to look inward for answers. His professors noted his keen observations, but they also noted his disinterest in the typical academic pursuits. He was more inclined to question than to accept, more likely to seek answers through direct experience than through second-hand knowledge. Thoreau's time at Harvard was short, but it was formative. It was during these years that he began to be drawn to the works of European philosophers and writers, especially those who emphasized individualism, nature, and self-reliance. These ideas would shape his thinking for the rest of his life. Thoreau's deepening sense of individualism and his growing love for nature were further nurtured by his time spent in the woods and fields surrounding Concord. While at Harvard, he began to take long walks in the woods, slowly becoming acquainted with the landscape that would later form the backdrop of his most famous work, Walden. These walks were not just physical journeys, they were spiritual and intellectual journeys as well. Thoreau began to see the natural world not as a mere backdrop to human life, but as an essential part of human existence, something that needed to be understood and respected. The seeds of his later transcendentalist beliefs were planted during these years, though Thoreau would not fully embrace the movement until later. Transcendentalism, with its emphasis on the importance of nature, the inherent goodness of the human soul, and the necessity of living in harmony with the natural world, resonated deeply with Thoreau's own ideas. This philosophy encouraged him to live according to his principles, to seek knowledge through personal experience, and to question the prevailing social norms. After graduating from Harvard in 1837, Thoreau faced a difficult decision: what to do with his life. The expectations for someone of his intellect were high, but Thoreau did not want to follow the conventional path. His peers pursued careers in law, business, and teaching, but Thoreau chose a different route. He returned to Concord, where he began to explore life on his own terms. In Concord, Thoreau worked briefly as a teacher, but it was his writing that became his true calling. At the age of 28, Thoreau began working closely with Ralph Waldo Emerson, the leader of the Transcendentalist movement, who became a close friend and mentor to him. Emerson's influence on Thoreau was profound, but it was not one of blind acceptance. Instead, Thoreau admired Emerson's ability to see the spiritual and philosophical potential in nature and human life, and he took these ideas and made them his own. In the years following his return to Concord, Thoreau began to formulate his own ideas about the relationship between humans and nature. He felt strongly that people had become disconnected from the land, trapped in the machinery of modern society, and that the true meaning of life could be found in living simply and harmoniously with the earth. His early writings, though not widely known at the time, began to express these ideas in earnest. It was during this period that Thoreau developed the deep connection with the natural world that would lead him to spend 2 years at Walden Pond, living alone in a cabin he built himself. This period of solitude would allow him to meditate on the purpose of life, on the nature of the human spirit, and on the importance of living deliberately. It would also lead to one of his most famous works, Walden, which would forever change the way people thought about the relationship between nature and human life. Thoreau's early life in Concord, marked by his intellectual curiosity, his quiet observation of the world, and his growing love for nature, set the stage for the man he would become. It was a life of simplicity, of questioning, and of striving for a deeper understanding of the world and humanity's place within it. These early years, shaped by the natural beauty of Concord and the intellectual ferment of New England, were the foundation of Thoreau's legacy. As we continue to explore Thoreau's life, we will see how the lessons of his early years would evolve and deepen, leading him to an extraordinary life of quiet rebellion, thoughtful solitude, and profound wisdom. But for now, we rest in the peaceful landscape of his beginnings, allowing the gentle rhythms of his early life to settle into our hearts. After completing his studies at Harvard College in 1837, Thoreau began to understand more deeply the relationship between the mind and the natural world. Harvard at that time was an institution rooted in tradition, yet its very structure seemed at odds with Thoreau's growing sense of individuality and independence. The lessons Thoreau learned during his time at the university were not confined to the lectures or textbooks, but rather shaped by the conversations he engaged in and the intellectual figures he encountered. Thoreau's time at Harvard was formative, even though it was not marked by any remarkable academic distinction. He found the rigid, formulaic style of education constricting, and his professors, many of whom were esteemed scholars, often failed to inspire him as they might have with other students. The classical education at Harvard emphasized logic, rhetoric, and the canon of Western thought, but Thoreau was drawn to a different set of ideas, particularly those that placed value on the self, nature, and the human spirit. His early exposure to the works of transcendentalist thinkers, such as Ralph Waldo Emerson and the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, planted the seeds for his later ideas. At Harvard, Thoreau's thinking began to diverge from the conventional. While many of his peers were focused on preparing themselves for careers in law, business, or ministry, Thoreau found his true calling in the world of nature, literature, and philosophy. His interests were eclectic, and he was drawn to subjects that most students of his time overlooked: philosophy, natural history, and the study of nature's rhythms. Thoreau's education extended far beyond the walls of Harvard. The philosophy of transcendentalism, which emphasized the spiritual connection between humanity and the natural world, began to take root in his mind. The transcendentalists were thinkers who believed that the natural world was a direct reflection of spiritual truth, and that humans could access higher truth through a deep connection to nature. This view of the world would form the foundation of much of Thoreau's later writings. It was also at Harvard that Thoreau encountered the first stirrings of his interest in the abolitionist movement. During the 1830s, the issue of slavery was a contentious one in New England, and the emerging abolitionist movement began to gain traction in the region. Thoreau, like many of his contemporaries, was disturbed by the injustice of slavery, but unlike many others, he refused to accept the status quo. His time at Harvard was a period of awakening to the harsh realities of American society and an understanding of the need for reform. Despite his reservations about the institution, Harvard provided Thoreau with the intellectual grounding to pursue his own path. He graduated in 1837, but he was not bound by the expectations of his degree. He turned instead to nature, literature, and philosophy as his primary sources of knowledge. His education, rather than ending with his formal schooling, expanded as he became more immersed in the intellectual currents of his time. After leaving Harvard, Thoreau returned to Concord and took up a variety of jobs, but his true intellectual pursuits were just beginning. He worked briefly as a teacher, tutoring local children, but it was clear that he had little interest in the conventional classroom. He quickly left that role behind to focus on more solitary and reflective work, writing and observing the natural world. It was in Concord, his lifelong home, that Thoreau would begin to seriously develop his ideas. The small rural town was far removed from the bustling cities of the time, and this isolation allowed him the space to think and write. He walked through the woods and fields of Concord, observing the world with a deep, almost meditative focus. Thoreau's walks, especially those in the woods and around Walden Pond, became more than just physical exercises. They were intellectual journeys, during which Thoreau sought to better understand the interconnectedness of all living things. His observations would become the backbone of much of his future work. Thoreau's relationship with Ralph Waldo Emerson, a leading figure in the transcendentalist movement, would become a pivotal influence in his intellectual life. Emerson's invitation to Thoreau to stay with him at his home in Concord marked the beginning of their close friendship. Emerson's influence on Thoreau was profound, and it was through Emerson that Thoreau was introduced to the larger transcendentalist movement. Emerson, an essayist, philosopher, and poet, had long championed the idea that the natural world was a mirror of the human spirit. Thoreau, who had always felt a deep affinity for nature, was drawn to this idea. Emerson saw in Thoreau a kindred spirit, a young man who had the potential to be a great thinker. He encouraged Thoreau to write, to express his ideas, and to not be afraid of the world's expectations. Emerson recognized that Thoreau's vision of the world was unique, and that his contributions to literature and philosophy would be significant. In many ways, Emerson helped Thoreau find his voice, urging him to explore his own ideas rather than simply adopt the prevailing opinions of the time. It was during his close association with Emerson that Thoreau began to formulate some of his most enduring ideas. The idea of self-reliance, the belief that individuals should trust their inner voices and instincts, became central to his thinking. Thoreau was deeply influenced by the belief that people must live in harmony with nature, that simplicity and independence were virtues, and that society's distractions and materialism led to spiritual emptiness. These ideas would later form the foundation of Walden, his most famous work. The influence of Emerson and the Transcendentalist movement was crucial, but Thoreau also began to develop a sense of individuality that went beyond mere intellectual conformity. Thoreau was not a follower of any one school of thought. He created his own path, blending the ideas of transcendentalism with his personal experiences and observations of the world. In many ways, Thoreau's education was not confined to books or formal instruction. It was shaped by his personal experiences, his relationship with nature, and his interactions with the intellectual circles of New England. The books he read and the people he encountered helped him refine his beliefs, but it was in the woods of Concord and in the quiet of his cabin at Walden Pond that Thoreau's true education took place. As we move through the next chapter of Thoreau's life, we will begin to see how the lessons he learned, both in his formal education and through his personal experiences, would culminate in the creation of Walden, a work that would encapsulate his philosophy of simplicity, self-reliance, and the deep spiritual connection between humanity and nature. After leaving Harvard and returning to Concord, Henry David Thoreau faced a significant turning point. Though he had acquired a formal education, he knew that the true path to understanding lay in experience, both personal and intellectual. In many ways, this period marked the beginning of Thoreau's literary journey, the unfolding of a life dedicated to writing, reflection, and living according to his ideals. The natural world, with its profound quiet and timeless rhythms, would serve as his canvas, while his pen would be the tool with which he translated his observations into words. In the early years after returning to Concord, Thoreau experimented with various forms of writing, but his true voice would only emerge after spending significant time in solitude. At first, however, he dabbled in various writing endeavours, from short essays to journal entries, capturing his thoughts on everything from nature to society. His journals, which would later become a treasure trove of wisdom, were written with the same meticulous care he used to observe the natural world. These journals were not merely a record of events. They were a space where Thoreau explored his philosophy, questioned his beliefs, and reflected on the world around him. During this time, Thoreau began to distance himself from the conventional routes of employment. While many of his peers pursued careers in law, ministry, or teaching, Thoreau found these paths unsatisfactory. He worked briefly as a school teacher, but even this position did not suit his desires. The rigid structure of the classroom, with its prescribed curricula and prescribed ways of thinking, was at odds with Thoreau's independent nature. It was here, in the tension between his desire to live freely and his need to support himself, that Thoreau made a significant decision that would shape his future. He would seek ways to live a life of greater simplicity, dedicating himself more fully to his writing and intellectual pursuits. Thoreau's first major literary effort was a book he co-authored with his brother, John Thoreau. Titled A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers, it was a chronicle of a journey the two brothers had taken together in 1839. The book, which is not widely successful at the time, was nevertheless a reflection of Thoreau's growing interest in nature, travel, and writing. Though A Week did not garner the acclaim that Thoreau would later receive for Walden, it nonetheless laid the groundwork for his future literary success. While Thoreau's early writing was largely focused on documenting his personal experiences and the natural world, it was clear that his true calling lay in exploring deeper philosophical themes. He began to view writing not merely as a form of self-expression, but as a way to challenge others to think more deeply about their own lives. Thoreau was influenced not only by the transcendentalist thinkers of his time, but also by the works of earlier philosophers and writers. His philosophical outlook, which blended idealism with practicality, began to take shape through his essays, where he would address themes of self-reliance, individualism, and the importance of living a simple, purposeful life. One of the most profound influences on Thoreau's literary development was his friendship with Ralph Waldo Emerson. Emerson, already a celebrated essayist and poet, became both a mentor and a sounding board for Thoreau's ideas. The two men shared a deep philosophical connection, and Emerson's support was instrumental in encouraging Thoreau to pursue his writing more seriously. Thoreau, for his part, was deeply moved by Emerson's transcendentalist ideals. Emerson believed that individuals could find spiritual truth through their direct experience with nature and their own thoughts, and Thoreau began to incorporate these ideas into his own worldview. But it was not just Emerson's intellectual guidance that shaped Thoreau's thinking. It was also the examples of writers who had come before him. Thoreau was influenced by the works of William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and other Romantic poets who celebrated the beauty of nature and the power of the individual. These writers placed great value on personal experience and sought to elevate nature to a central role in their writing. Thoreau, whose deep connection to nature was already evident, found inspiration in these works and sought to embody these principles in his own writing. As Thoreau continued to write and reflect on his experiences, he began to see writing as an act of self-discovery. It was through his writing that he could most fully express his thoughts and shape his own understanding of the world. Writing became an essential part of his intellectual and personal growth, a way for him to make sense of the world's complexities and simplify them for others to consider. Thoreau's transition from a writer of personal reflections and observations to a writer of more philosophical works was gradual but inevitable. The more he wrote, the more he saw the connection between personal experience and universal truth. It was this realization that would eventually lead to Walden, his most famous work in which he would distill his philosophy into a concise and powerful message. During this period of literary development, Thoreau began to gain recognition as a thinker in his own right. His essays, though not widely popular at the time, were well regarded by a select group of readers who appreciated his intellectual rigor and his deep commitment to personal independence. Thoreau's reputation as a writer and thinker grew steadily, and he began to develop a sense of the kind of writer he wanted to be, one who would challenge his readers to reconsider their lives, to embrace the simplicity and beauty of nature, and to live more consciously. At the same time, Thoreau was deeply involved in his community. Though he was often solitary and introspective, he was not entirely removed from the world around him. Thoreau was a committed abolitionist, an active participant in the anti-slavery movement, and a vocal critic of the government's actions, particularly regarding slavery and the Mexican-American War. His advocacy for civil disobedience, which he later articulated in his famous essay of the same name, was an extension of his belief in individual conscience and moral responsibility. Thoreau's activism and his writing were interconnected. Both sought to challenge the status quo and promote a more just and meaningful life. By the time Thoreau's literary journey had fully unfolded, he was no longer merely writing for himself. He was writing for a broader audience, one that would be challenged to think more deeply about their own lives, their connection to nature, and their moral obligations in the world. His literary works, though grounded in his own experiences, had universal implications, offering insights into the human condition that remain relevant to this day. By the time Thoreau had completed his early writings and began to explore his more philosophical and literary paths, the woods of Concord had already begun to take on an almost sacred significance in his life. The tranquil paths that wound through the forests and fields surrounding the town were more than just places to walk. They were places where he could connect deeply with nature, reflect on his thoughts, and allow his spirit to roam freely. These walks would become the foundation of his future writing, most notably Walden, a book that would come to define his legacy. Thoreau's love for nature was not merely an aesthetic appreciation for the beauty of the world around him. It was, in his view, a deeply spiritual and intellectual connection. Nature, for Thoreau, was a teacher and a guide. Through his walks, he began to see the world in a way that many people of his time and even many people today fail to see. To Thoreau, the natural world was full of lessons about life, human nature, and the necessity of simplicity. The trees, the rivers, the soil, they were all part of a larger interconnected system that could teach profound truths about living deliberately and consciously. In these quiet moments spent in the woods, Thoreau began to refine the central tenets of his philosophy. The most important of these was the idea of living deliberately, of consciously choosing how one lives, rather than simply following the patterns set by society. He believed that too many people spent their lives chasing after superficial goals, distracted by the demands of society, and disconnected from the deeper truths of the world. Thoreau saw nature as a corrective to this. By spending time in nature, he believed, people could reconnect with their true selves and begin to live more authentically. As Thoreau walked through the forests and fields, he began to take detailed notes on everything he observed. The changing seasons, the rhythms of the animals, the growth of plants. Each moment in nature was a reflection of larger patterns in life. It was during these walks that Thoreau developed his keen sense of observation, his ability to see the minute details of the world around him. But it was also during these walks that he began to question the ways in which people lived. He saw how disconnected most people were from the natural world, and how little time they spent simply observing the world around them. Thoreau's walks were not merely an escape from society. They were an opportunity to deepen his understanding of the world. He saw the landscape of Concord as a microcosm of the larger world, and by paying attention to the small, quiet details, he believed he could uncover universal truths. As he walked, Thoreau reflected on the interconnectedness of all things, how the life of the tree was linked to the life of the river, how the changing seasons mirrored the ebb and flow of human life, how the growth of plants symbolized the potential for human growth. These reflections would form the core of Thoreau's philosophical outlook, which he would later encapsulate in his writing. It was during these solitary walks that the seeds of Walden were planted. Thoreau had already spent time contemplating the idea of a simpler, more purposeful life, and his walks through the woods only reinforced this belief. He realized that in order to live the life he wanted, one that was focused on deep reflection, self-reliance, and connection with nature, he would need to remove himself from the distractions of society. In the quiet of the woods, he could fully immerse himself in the natural world and begin to experience life on his own terms, without the pressures and distractions of modern life. In 1845, Thoreau made the radical decision to build a small cabin on the shores of Walden Pond, a secluded area just outside of Concord. This decision was not an impulsive one. It was the culmination of years of reflection, walking, and writing. Thoreau sought to live deliberately, to prove to himself that a life of simplicity and self-reliance was not only possible but preferable. The cabin at Walden Pond became his laboratory, a place where he could put his philosophical ideas into practice. By removing himself from the comforts of modern life, Thoreau sought to discover what was truly necessary for a fulfilling life and what was merely superfluous. The cabin at Walden Pond, which he built with his own hands, was modest but functional. It was a small one-room structure that provided him with the basic necessities: shelter, warmth, and a place to write. Thoreau lived alone in the cabin for 2 years, from 1845 to 1847. During this time, he wrote prolifically, documenting his experiences and his observations of the natural world. He also reflected on the nature of society, the importance of self-reliance, and the need for individuals to live according to their principles, rather than merely conforming to the expectations of others. Thoreau's time at Walden Pond was not without its challenges. Though he sought solitude, he was not entirely removed from the world around him. He had occasional visits from neighbours and friends, including his beloved sister, Sophia, and his mentor, Ralph Waldo Emerson. He also spent time working, primarily as a surveyor and as a schoolteacher, but it was the solitude of Walden Pond that allowed Thoreau to fully immerse himself in his thoughts, without the constant distractions of daily life. During these 2 years, Thoreau experienced the full cycle of the seasons, from the quiet winter months to the lively summer days. He observed the growth of the plants, the movements of the animals, and the gradual changes in the landscape. These experiences form the foundation for Walden, the book that would become his greatest literary achievement. Walden was not merely a memoir of Thoreau's time at the pond. It was a philosophical treatise, a work that challenged readers to reconsider their relationship with nature, with society, and with themselves. Thoreau's reflections on nature were deeply intertwined with his ideas about self-reliance, simplicity, and the importance of living deliberately. In the book, he called on individuals to question the values of materialism and consumerism that dominated society, and instead to focus on the things that truly matter: spiritual growth, connection with nature, and living in accordance with one's values. Through his time at Walden Pond, Thoreau sought to prove that a life of simplicity and self-reliance was not only possible but preferable. His experience was a testament to the power of solitude, reflection, and connection with nature. It was a life lived deliberately, and it was a life that in many ways challenged the conventions of the time. Thoreau's time at Walden Pond and the writings that came from it would forever change the way people thought about nature, individualism, and the possibility of living more consciously. His lessons, learned from walking through the woods and living in solitude, would continue to resonate long after he left Walden Pond. And as we continue through his story, we will see how Walden became more than just a book. It became a philosophy, a call to live more intentionally, and a timeless reflection on the nature of existence. The relationship between Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson was one of mutual admiration and intellectual camaraderie. Emerson, a respected essayist and philosopher, played a pivotal role in shaping Thoreau's thoughts and worldview. It was through Emerson that Thoreau was introduced to the Transcendentalist movement, a philosophical and literary tradition that would deeply influence his work. Yet, while Emerson's influence was significant, Thoreau was not a mere follower. He was an independent thinker who drew on Emerson's ideas but ultimately forged his own path. The two men met in Concord, where Emerson had already established himself as a prominent figure in the intellectual circles of New England. Emerson, who had been writing and lecturing on transcendentalism for several years, saw in Thoreau a kindred spirit, a young man with a deep connection to nature and a philosophical outlook that aligned with his own. Emerson was captivated by Thoreau's intellectual depth and his unorthodox approach to life, and the two quickly became close friends. Thoreau, in turn, admired Emerson's intellectual rigor and his ability to articulate ideas that resonated with the emerging social and spiritual movements of the time. Emerson's belief in the importance of individualism, self-reliance, and the spiritual connection between humans and nature was a philosophy that deeply influenced Thoreau. But it was not just Emerson's ideas that shaped Thoreau's thinking, it was also Emerson's encouragement. Emerson was a mentor who urged Thoreau to follow his instincts, to write, and to express his unique perspective on the world. The friendship between Emerson and Thoreau was one of both intellectual exchange and emotional support. Emerson, as the older and more established figure, offered guidance and inspiration, while Thoreau, with his fresh perspective and independent spirit, challenged Emerson's thinking. Thoreau was not afraid to question Emerson's ideas, and Emerson welcomed this intellectual challenge. Their relationship was based on a mutual respect for each other's individuality and a shared belief in the power of thought and reflection. One of the most significant moments in their friendship came when Emerson encouraged Thoreau to write more publicly about his philosophical ideas. Emerson recognized that Thoreau had a unique voice, and he saw in him the potential to become an influential writer. Thoreau, who had always been somewhat reticent about his writing, took Emerson's advice to heart. Under Emerson's guidance, Thoreau began to write more prolifically, focusing on topics such as nature, individualism, and the necessity of living deliberately. Despite their intellectual kinship, Thoreau and Emerson had differences in their views on the role of society. While Emerson believed in the power of the individual to transcend societal norms and reach a higher spiritual state, Thoreau was more critical of the ways in which society shaped individual lives. Thoreau was less willing to accept the compromises that Emerson sometimes suggested in his writing. For Thoreau, the pursuit of truth and personal integrity required not only individualism, but also a rejection of many of society's conventions. In his mind, true freedom and self-reliance meant living outside the bounds of the materialistic and consumer-driven world that he saw growing around him. The differences between Emerson and Thoreau were not only intellectual but also practical. While Emerson was a successful and established public figure, Thoreau was more reclusive and unassuming. Thoreau often retreated into nature, seeking solitude and time for reflection. Emerson, on the other hand, was more involved in the social and intellectual movements of his time, attending lectures, hosting gatherings, and participating in public discourse. Thoreau's time at Walden Pond, living alone in a cabin he built himself, was a deliberate choice to remove himself from the distractions of society. For Thoreau, solitude was essential to understanding the deeper truths of life. Emerson, though he appreciated the value of solitude, did not fully share Thoreau's inclination toward retreat. Despite these differences, Emerson and Thoreau remained close friends throughout their lives. Their intellectual bond was unshakable, and their mutual respect for each other's ideas continued to shape their work. Emerson's writings, especially his essays on self-reliance and the individual's connection to nature, deeply influenced Thoreau's thinking, providing the philosophical foundation for much of his own work. Thoreau, in turn, helped Emerson to see the importance of the practical application of these ideas. Thoreau's life at Walden Pond and his commitment to living deliberately served as a real-world example of the principles Emerson espoused in his writings. Though Emerson's influence on Thoreau was profound, it is important to note that Thoreau's ideas were never merely derivative of Emerson's. Thoreau's work, especially Walden, represents a more radical application of transcendentalist ideas. Emerson spoke of the importance of self-reliance and individuality, but Thoreau took these principles to their logical conclusion. He believed that self-reliance was not merely a philosophical ideal, but a way of life. Thoreau's rejection of the materialism and social conventions of his time was not just an intellectual stance, it was a deeply personal commitment. For Thoreau, living deliberately meant rejecting the comforts and distractions of society in favor of a life lived in accordance with one's deepest values and instincts. While Emerson's work continued to be popular and influential, Thoreau's writings took on a more distinctively personal tone. His time at Walden Pond, living alone and writing about his experiences, was an expression of his belief that true knowledge comes not from books or lectures, but from personal experience. Thoreau's reflections on nature, society, and individualism were grounded in his own observations and his own life. He believed that each individual must find their own path, and that this could only be done by stepping away from the noise of society and listening to one's own inner voice. The friendship between Emerson and Thoreau was a meeting of minds, but it was also a relationship that helped to define the intellectual climate of 19th century America. Together they helped to shape the transcendentalist movement, which emphasized the spiritual and philosophical importance of nature, the individual, and the rejection of conventional social norms. Emerson's eloquent essays and Thoreau's more practical writings complemented each other, offering readers both the philosophical framework and the lived example of transcendentalist principles. In 1845, Henry David Thoreau made the bold and transformative decision to leave behind the comforts of conventional life and build a small cabin at Walden Pond. This moment marked the beginning of what would become his most famous and enduring experiment in simple living. Thoreau sought to live deliberately, to free himself from the distractions of society, and to discover the true essentials of life. He did not do this out of mere whim or desire for isolation. It was a conscious choice, rooted in his philosophy of self-reliance and his belief that the modern world had become overly complex and disconnected from nature. Thoreau's decision to live at Walden Pond was not a flight from the world, but rather a deliberate attempt to engage with it on a deeper, more meaningful level. He believed that most people lived their lives by habit and convention, without truly understanding what it meant to be alive. In his view, modern society was too focused on material wealth and the pursuit of distractions. The time had come, in Thoreau's mind, to remove himself from this environment and live in a way that was more in tune with his own inner values, more aligned with the natural world around him. In choosing Walden Pond, Thoreau selected a place of great natural beauty but also one of solitude and simplicity. Walden Pond, located just outside of Concord, was a serene and peaceful spot, far removed from the hustle and bustle of urban life. Thoreau's cabin, which he built himself using simple tools and materials, was a small, modest structure that stood as a symbol of his rejection of the excesses of society. With the help of his friends and family, Thoreau constructed the cabin on land he rented from Emerson. It was situated near the shore of the pond, surrounded by woods and wildlife, creating an ideal setting for the kind of life Thoreau wished to live. The cabin itself was not large or luxurious. It was just big enough to serve as shelter for Thoreau during his 2-year experiment in self-sufficiency. The cabin had no running water, no electricity, and no modern conveniences. Instead, it was a simple structure with a fireplace for warmth and a small table for writing and reflection. Thoreau's goal was not to live in poverty, but to live in a way that was free from the distractions of consumerism and the demands of society. He wanted to test his belief that it was possible to live a fulfilling and meaningful life with very few material possessions. Thoreau's time at Walden Pond was not a retreat from the world, but rather an opportunity to explore the deeper questions of life. He did not seek solitude for the sake of escape, but as a means of finding clarity and understanding. During his 2 years at Walden, Thoreau wrote extensively in his journal, reflecting on his experiences, his observations of nature, and his thoughts on society. He was not merely retreating into isolation. He was actively engaging with the world around him, looking for truths that could be found only through direct experience. The decision to live at Walden Pond was in many ways a rejection of the prevailing norms of his time. Thoreau was deeply critical of the industrialization and materialism that were spreading across America. He saw how people were becoming more focused on accumulating wealth and acquiring possessions at the expense of their spiritual well-being. In his view, people had lost touch with the natural world and had forgotten the value of simplicity, contemplation, and self-reliance. By living at Walden Pond, Thoreau sought to remind himself, and others, that true wealth could not be measured in material goods, but in a life lived according to one's principles. Thoreau's experiment at Walden Pond was also a response to the social and political issues of his time. Thoreau was deeply concerned about the institution of slavery, and he believed that the growing focus on materialism was distracting people from the moral questions that needed to be addressed. He saw that the government was complicit in the institution of slavery, and he was troubled by the way society turned a blind eye to such injustices. His act of civil disobedience, refusing to pay taxes in protest of the government's support of slavery, was a direct challenge to the complacency of society. Thoreau's retreat to Walden Pond was, in part, a way for him to step back from the world and reflect on the moral issues that were pressing on him. Though Thoreau's decision to live at Walden Pond was deeply personal, it was also a philosophical act. He sought to show that it was possible to live a meaningful life without the trappings of modern society. He did not expect everyone to follow his example, but he hoped to inspire others to examine their own lives and consider whether they too might be living in a way that was disconnected from their true values. Thoreau's time at Walden Pond was not an attempt to escape the world, but rather a way to engage with it more fully. By shedding the distractions and excesses that he believed were clouding people's ability to see what was truly important. Thoreau's experiment at Walden Pond was also an opportunity to explore the idea of self-reliance in its most practical form. By living in isolation, Thoreau became fully responsible for his own sustenance. He grew his own food, built his own shelter, and took care of his own needs without relying on others. Thoreau's self-reliance was not about self-interest or individualism in a selfish sense. It was about the freedom that comes with living independently and relying on one's own abilities. For Thoreau, self-reliance meant living with integrity and living in a way that was true to one's own beliefs, without being swayed by the opinions of others or the demands of society. His time at Walden Pond was a period of intense personal growth. It was here that Thoreau began to fully develop the ideas that would form the core of his most famous work, Walden, a book that would later inspire generations of readers to consider the value of simplicity and the importance of living deliberately. Through his time in the woods, Thoreau began to see how the act of living simply could lead to a deeper understanding of life itself. Thoreau's time at Walden Pond was not just an isolated experiment in simple living. It was a profound journey of self-discovery, intellectual growth, and spiritual reflection. During his 2 years living in the small cabin he built himself, Thoreau sought to answer the question, what is the essential purpose of life? His experiment was designed to strip away the distractions and complexities of modern society, leaving only the fundamental truths of human existence and a direct connection to nature. He believed that in order to live a meaningful life, it was necessary to reduce one's needs to the most basic essentials. Thoreau's experience at Walden Pond was deeply rooted in the rhythms of nature. He woke each day with the rising sun, and his life followed the cycles of the seasons. In the spring and summer, he planted his garden, tended to his crops, and walked the nearby woods, observing the life around him with an almost meditative attention to detail. In the fall, he harvested his food, prepared for the coming winter, and reflected on the year's lessons. In winter, with the snow blanketing the world, he found solace in the quiet of his cabin, where the stillness of nature gave him the space to write, reflect, and deepen his understanding of his own philosophy. One of the key aspects of Thoreau's life at Walden Pond was the idea of solitude. He had chosen to live alone, far from the noise and distractions of society, in order to more fully engage with his thoughts and with the natural world. But this solitude was not born of loneliness or isolation. It was a purposeful withdrawal that allowed Thoreau to think clearly and to discover what truly mattered to him. He believed that the noise of society, its endless chatter, its frantic pace, its preoccupation with materialism, prevented people from hearing the more subtle, yet more profound truths of life. In his solitude, Thoreau came to a deeper understanding of his own thoughts and beliefs. He wrote in his journal daily, recording his observations, reflections, and insights. His writing during this period was a blend of personal experience, philosophical inquiry, and natural observation. It was during his time at Walden that Thoreau's ideas on nature, simplicity, and individualism crystallized, forming the foundation for his later work, Walden. Thoreau's connection with the natural world during his time at Walden was one of deep reverence. He saw nature as a living, breathing entity, one that was not only beautiful but also full of wisdom. The trees, the animals, the changing seasons, they were all part of a larger system, a system in which human beings were just one small but significant part. Thoreau believed that by observing nature closely, people could learn more about themselves and about the deeper truths of existence. His time at Walden Pond was also a time of rigorous self-reflection. Thoreau constantly questioned the purpose of his life and the society around him. He asked himself, what is truly necessary for a fulfilling life? What does it mean to live deliberately, and how can one live in a way that is both authentic and meaningful? These questions guided his daily life, his work, and his writing. His time at Walden was not just about physical survival, it was a quest for inner clarity and spiritual understanding. One of the central themes of Walden is the importance of simplicity. Thoreau believed that modern life had become too complicated, too burdened by unnecessary possessions, social obligations, and material desires. In his view, people had become slaves to their own desires, caught in an endless cycle of consumption that left them feeling empty and disconnected. By removing himself from this world and living simply, Thoreau hoped to demonstrate that true freedom and happiness could be found in reducing one's needs to the essentials. During his year at Walden, Thoreau worked only when necessary. He built his own cabin, grew his own food, and lived off the land. He learned how to be self-sufficient, relying on his own skills and resourcefulness. He also spent time reflecting on the nature of work itself. Thoreau believed that much of the work people did was unnecessary or at best superficial. He saw the busyness of society as a form of distraction, a way for people to avoid facing the deeper questions of life. For Thoreau, the act of working was not about accumulating wealth or possessions, but about contributing to one's own self-reliance and understanding. In addition to living simply, Thoreau's year at Walden was also marked by his deep commitment to spiritual growth. He saw the experience as an opportunity to connect with the divine in a way that was direct and unmediated. In the quiet of the woods, he believed that he could access a higher level of awareness, one that transcended the noise and distractions of the everyday world. Thoreau's time at Walden was a spiritual journey as much as it was a physical experiment, and he sought to align his life with his deepest beliefs and values. Although Thoreau was physically isolated at Walden Pond, he was not completely removed from the world. He maintained connections with his family, friends, and neighbors, including his mentor, Ralph Waldo Emerson. Emerson, who'd encouraged Thoreau to pursue this experiment, visited him regularly, and the two continued their intellectual discussions during Thoreau's time at Walden. Thoreau also engaged with the broader intellectual community through his writing and correspondence. In fact, Thoreau's time at Walden was not a retreat from society, but a way for him to engage more deeply with it. Through his writing, he sought to inspire others to live more consciously and to question the assumptions and values of the world around them. Though his time at Walden was relatively short, just over 2 years, it was one of the most transformative periods of Thoreau's life. During those years, he learned profound lessons about the nature of work, the importance of simplicity, and the need for personal reflection. His time at Walden was not just an experiment in living differently, it was an opportunity for him to test his ideas about self-reliance, nature, and the human spirit. When Thoreau left Walden Pond in 1847, he carried with him the wisdom he had gained from his time in solitude. He had experienced the power of nature and the importance of living deliberately, and these lessons would continue to shape his work for the rest of his life. Walden, which he would publish in 1854, would become his most famous work, a reflection of his time at the pond and a call for others to consider how they might live more intentionally. As we continue to explore Thoreau's life, we will see how his experiences at Walden Pond influence not only his writing, but also his involvement in social and political causes. The lessons he learned during this time would continue to shape his thinking on issues such as abolition, civil disobedience, and the role of the individual in society. After 2 years spent at Walden Pond, Thoreau emerged not only with a new understanding of himself and the world around him, but also with a vision for a written work that would encapsulate his experiences and philosophy. The decision to live deliberately, to reject the complexity and distractions of modern life in favour of simplicity, had profound personal implications. But Thoreau's time at Walden was more than an individual experiment. It was a demonstration of what he believed to be the path to a more meaningful life. His experience in the woods, in solitude and surrounded by nature would become the foundation of his most famous work, Walden. The writing of Walden began soon after Thoreau's time at the pond, but it wasn't just a record of his 2 years spent in the cabin. It was a philosophical manifesto, a work that would challenge readers to reconsider their own lives, their relationship to nature, and their dependence on material wealth. Thoreau wrote with a clear purpose: to show that a life of simplicity and self-reliance was not only possible but desirable. He hoped that his reflections on nature and the human experience would inspire others to live more consciously and thoughtfully, to question the assumptions of society, and to embrace a life that was more aligned with their true values. At the heart of Walden is the idea that people can find deep, lasting meaning in the most basic aspect of life. Thoreau's insistence on living simply, on reducing one's needs to the essentials, was not a rejection of life's pleasures, but rather a call to look beyond the superficial distractions that often dominate people's lives. In Thoreau's view, modern society had become preoccupied with consumption, with the accumulation of wealth and possessions, and with the pursuit of external validation. By removing himself from this cycle of consumption, Thoreau believed he could discover a life of greater depth, a life more in tune with nature and his own inner self. Thoreau's reflections on nature in Walden are among the most powerful in his work. For him, nature was not merely a backdrop to human life. This was a teacher, a source of wisdom and insight. Through his careful observations of the changing seasons, the movements of animals, and the growth of plants, Thoreau came to see nature as a mirror of the human condition. In the cycles of life and death, growth and decay, he found profound lessons about the impermanence of life and the interconnectedness of all things. He saw in nature a pattern of harmony and simplicity that humans could learn from, if only they took the time to pay attention. Thoreau's time at Walden was also a meditation on solitude and self-reflection. In his solitude, he discovered not only the richness of his inner life, but also the ways in which society's expectations and distractions prevented people from truly knowing themselves. Thoreau's writing in Walden is filled with gentle exhortations for people to slow down, to stop and listen, to be more mindful of their surroundings. He argued that the constant noise and busyness of modern life kept people from seeing what truly mattered, from understanding the deeper truths that lay just beneath the surface of their daily lives. At its core, Walden is a call for individuals to live authentically, to be true to themselves, and to align their lives with their deepest values. Thoreau encouraged readers to reject the conventional paths laid out by society, paths that often led to empty materialism and unfulfilling work, and to instead seek lives of meaning and purpose. He believed that true wealth was not to be found in possessions but in spiritual and intellectual growth, in a connection to nature, and in the cultivation of a strong and independent mind. Thoreau's reflections on the relationship between humans and nature are particularly significant in Walden. At a time when the country was rapidly industrializing, with cities growing larger and technology advancing, Thoreau saw a society that was losing touch with the natural world. He believed that people had become disconnected from the earth, caught up in the machinery of progress and forgetting the simple truths that nature could teach. Through his time at Walden Pond, Thoreau sought to demonstrate that reconnecting with nature was essential, not only for personal well-being but also for the health of society as a whole. One of the most striking elements of Walden is Thoreau's critique of modern work and the way people spent their time. He was deeply critical of the ways in which society defined success, focusing almost exclusively on the accumulation of wealth and the pursuit of status. Thoreau argued that many people worked tirelessly for things that were ultimately unnecessary: material goods, social approval, and the trappings of success, while neglecting the more meaningful aspects of life. He famously asked, "Why should we live with such hurry and waste of life?" and encouraged his readers to ask themselves whether their lives were truly aligned with their values or simply driven by the demands of society. In Walden, Thoreau also delves into the idea of self-reliance. He believed that independence was essential to living a fulfilling life, but self-reliance for Thoreau was not about self-interest or egoism. Instead, it was about cultivating the inner strength and clarity to live according to one's own principles, without being swayed by the pressures of society. Thoreau's time at Walden Pond was an experiment in living this ideal, and in his writing he urged others to do the same. He emphasized the importance of finding one's own path and avoiding the conventional wisdom of the world. For Thoreau, true freedom came not from external circumstances, but from the ability to follow one's inner compass and live authentically. While Walden is often considered a work of transcendentalism, it is also a deeply practical guide for how to live a more meaningful life. Thoreau didn't simply preach philosophical ideas, he lived them. His writings are filled with practical advice on how to simplify one's life, cultivate independence, and connect more deeply with nature. Thoreau's experiment at Walden was, in many ways, a demonstration of how these ideals could be put into practice. Through his time at Walden Pond, he showed that living deliberately, choosing simplicity, embracing solitude, and seeking a deeper connection to the natural world was not a lofty ideal but a way of life that anyone could pursue. Thoreau's reflections in Walden were not just personal musings, they were a call to action, an invitation for others to consider how they might live more consciously and deliberately. He didn't expect everyone to follow his example, but he hoped that by sharing his story, others would be inspired to rethink their own lives and reconsider what truly mattered. His writing was a challenge to a society that had become preoccupied with material wealth and shallow pursuits, urging readers to seek a deeper, more fulfilling existence. While Henry David Thoreau's time at Walden Pond was dedicated to personal reflection and the search for a simpler, more deliberate life, his intellectual journey was also deeply tied to the social and political issues of his time. Thoreau was not an isolated thinker. He was engaged with the world around him and deeply concerned about the injustices he witnessed. One of the most profound and enduring contributions Thoreau made to American thought was his concept of civil disobedience, a form of protest that would later inspire generations of activists around the world. The roots of Thoreau's commitment to civil disobedience can be traced back to his strong moral convictions, particularly regarding slavery in the Mexican-American War. Thoreau was an outspoken abolitionist, and he was horrified by the United States' support for slavery, an institution he considered morally indefensible. He also believed that the Mexican-American War, which began in 1846, was an unjust conflict fueled by the expansionist desires of the US government. Thoreau viewed both slavery and the war as signs of a government that was complicit in injustice, and he believed that citizens had a moral obligation to resist such injustices. In 1846, Thoreau's protest against slavery in the Mexican-American War became personal. Thoreau refused to pay a poll tax, a tax that was levied by the government to fund the war. He believed that by paying the tax, he would be complicit in the actions of the government, which he saw as morally corrupt. As a result of his refusal to pay the tax, Thoreau was arrested and briefly imprisoned in the town of Concord. This experience of imprisonment had a profound effect on Thoreau, and it prompted him to write one of his most influential essays, Civil Disobedience. In this essay, Thoreau articulated his belief that individuals had a duty to resist unjust government actions, even if that meant breaking the law. He argued that when the law itself was immoral, such as when it upheld slavery or justified war, it was not only acceptable but necessary for individuals to act according to their own moral conscience and refuse to obey such laws. Thoreau's philosophy of civil disobedience was grounded in his deep respect for individual conscience. He believed that each person had an inherent responsibility to act in accordance with what they believed to be right. Regardless of the laws or the will of the majority, Thoreau was not advocating for violent revolution or armed rebellion. Rather, he called for peaceful resistance. In his view, non-violent disobedience was a more powerful and morally justifiable form of protest than passive acceptance or violent rebellion. By refusing to comply with an unjust law, Thoreau believed individuals could expose the moral failings of the government and awaken the conscience of society. One of the central ideas in civil disobedience is the concept of the higher law. Thoreau believed that there was a moral law that transcended the laws of government, a law that could be discovered through individual conscience and reflection. According to Thoreau, when government laws were in conflict with this higher moral law, when they sanctioned injustice, inequality, or oppression, individuals had an obligation to defy them. Thoreau famously stated, "That government is best which governs not at all," and argued that government's primary role should be to protect individual freedoms and prevent harm. When government failed to do so, it was the duty of citizens to withdraw their support. Thoreau's time at Walden Pond had been an experiment in self-reliance, in living deliberately and in alignment with one's own values. This same philosophy carried over into his political activism. For Thoreau, the individual's moral integrity was paramount, and the actions of the state should never override the conscience of the individual. His stance on civil disobedience was not just a theoretical position, but a deeply personal expression of his belief in the sanctity of individual moral judgment. Thoreau's advocacy for civil disobedience was grounded in a broader critique of the government's role in perpetuating injustice. He did not see his refusal to pay the poll tax as a personal act of rebellion, but as a moral necessity. Thoreau was not protesting for the sake of protest. He was protesting because he believed it was wrong for the government to perpetuate systems of violence and oppression. His refusal to comply with the tax was his way of refusing to be complicit in a government that, in his view, had betrayed its duty to uphold justice. The impact of Thoreau's essay on civil disobedience went far beyond his time at Walden Pond. His writings on the subject became a significant influence on later movements for social and political change, particularly in the 20th century. Leaders such as Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. were inspired by Thoreau's ideas of peaceful resistance. Gandhi, in particular, saw Thoreau's philosophy as a blueprint for his own campaigns of non-violent resistance against British colonial rule in India. Similarly, King adapted Thoreau's principles of civil disobedience to the struggle for civil rights in the United States, advocating for peaceful protest as a means of challenging unjust laws and systems of racial inequality. While Thoreau's ideas about civil disobedience have had a lasting influence, his actions during the Mexican-American War and his resistance to slavery were also deeply personal expressions of his character. He did not simply write about injustice, he lived by his convictions even when it led to personal discomfort. His arrest and imprisonment for refusing to pay the tax were, for Thoreau, a moment of moral clarity. He believed that his actions, however small they seemed, would set an example for others to follow and would contribute to the larger fight for justice. Thoreau's thoughts on civil disobedience were part of a larger body of work that sought to challenge the assumptions and injustices of society. His critique of government was not merely a call for political change, but a reflection of his broader philosophical views on individualism, self-reliance, and the moral responsibility of each person to live according to their principles. Thoreau's life and work, including his advocacy for civil disobedience, were guided by the belief that each individual had the power and the obligation to challenge systems of power that perpetuated injustice. One of the most profound and lasting elements of Henry David Thoreau's intellectual legacy is his deep and abiding connection to the natural world. Throughout his life, Thoreau viewed nature not only as a place of beauty and inspiration, but as a source of wisdom, a mirror for human existence, and a vital force that demanded respect. His philosophy of nature went far beyond simple aesthetic appreciation. For Thoreau, nature was a teacher, a guide, and an essential part of the human experience. This reverence for nature became central to his writings, most notably Walden, where he reflects on the power and significance of the natural world in shaping both individual lives and society. Thoreau's love of nature was born during his childhood in Concord, where he spent hours exploring the woods and fields surrounding his home. His early experiences in nature instilled in him a profound sense of wonder and respect, but it was not just the physical beauty of the landscape that captivated Thoreau. It was the deeper truths he believed nature could reveal about the human condition. He saw in the natural world an intricate, harmonious system that reflected the fundamental interconnectedness of all life. This interconnectedness, he believed, was something that human beings often overlooked in their pursuit of material wealth and social approval. Nature, for Thoreau, was both a source of solace and a mirror for the soul. He often wrote about the healing power of nature, and he believed that spending time in the natural world could lead to self-discovery and spiritual clarity. His time at Walden Pond was not just a retreat from society. It was a means of reconnecting with the earth and with his own inner self. In the stillness of the woods, Thoreau was able to hear his own thoughts more clearly, to reflect on the deeper meaning of life, and to gain insights into the patterns of existence. Nature, for Thoreau, was a sanctuary for the mind and soul, a place where one could find respite from the distractions and complexities of modern life. Thoreau's connection to nature was also deeply philosophical. He believed that the natural world could teach profound truths about life, death, and the human spirit. In his observations of the changing seasons, the growth of plants, and the behavior of animals, Thoreau saw a reflection of the human experience. He often drew parallels between the cycles of nature and the cycles of human life: birth, growth, decay, and renewal. For Thoreau, nature was a reminder of life's impermanence, but it was also a symbol of resilience and endurance. In nature, he found both a humbling acknowledgement of the transitory nature of existence and a celebration of the beauty and wonder of life. This view of nature was not just a personal philosophy, it was also the foundation for Thoreau's advocacy for environmental conservation. Thoreau was one of the early American writers to emphasize the importance of preserving the natural world. His belief in the intrinsic value of nature, that nature had worth beyond its utility to human beings, set him apart from many of his contemporaries, who often viewed the natural world primarily as a resource to be exploited. Thoreau's philosophy was rooted in the idea that nature was sacred and that human beings had a moral obligation to protect it. In Walden, Thoreau wrote extensively about the importance of living in harmony with nature, urging readers to see the world around them not just as a collection of resources to be used, but as a living, interconnected system that needed to be respected and preserved. He observed the animals, plants, and landscapes around him with a deep sense of reverence, and he believed that this kind of respect for the natural world was essential for living a meaningful and fulfilling life. Thoreau's call for ecological mindfulness was not limited to the individual level. It extended to society as a whole. He believed that modern industrialization was leading people away from a natural, harmonious existence. causing them to become disconnected from the very earth that sustained them. Thoreau's critique of industrialization was central to his environmental philosophy. He was deeply concerned about the rapid expansion of factories, railroads, and urbanization that were transforming the American landscape in the mid-19th century. Thoreau saw industrialization as a force that was not only damaging the environment, but also leading people away from their true selves. In his mind, the relentless pursuit of progress was diminishing the spiritual and emotional connection people had to nature. Thoreau believed that industrialization, with its emphasis on material gain and technological advancement, was eroding the quality of life and the human spirit. Thoreau's critique of industrialization was not merely a reaction to the changes he saw around him, but a philosophical response to the moral and spiritual consequences of those changes. He argued that by embracing materialism and consumerism, society was losing sight of the more important things in life, such as personal integrity, spiritual fulfillment, and a connection to the natural world. Thoreau's time at Walden Pond was in many ways a critique of this growing industrial world. He sought to demonstrate that there was a better way to live, a way that was simpler, more connected to nature, and more aligned with the human spirit. Thoreau also criticized the destruction of nature through the widespread exploitation of land, forests, and wildlife. His environmentalism was grounded in his belief that the earth had its own inherent value, independent of its utility to humans. He rejected the idea that nature existed solely for human use, advocating instead for a view of the natural world as a place of intrinsic worth. Thoreau's philosophy was based on a deep respect for the earth and a recognition of the interconnectedness of all living things. His views on conservation were revolutionary for his time, as he urged people to see nature as a partner in their own growth, rather than something to be controlled and dominated. While Thoreau's environmentalism was primarily focused on the preservation of nature, he also saw the natural world as a source of moral and spiritual guidance. He believed that by spending time in nature, people could gain a greater understanding of themselves and the world around them. Nature, in Thoreau's view, was not just a passive backdrop for human life, but an active force that could shape and influence human character. Through his observations of the natural world, Thoreau came to believe that human beings had a responsibility not only to protect the environment, but also to live in harmony with it. Thoreau's contributions to the environmental movement were not just philosophical, they were also practical. His detailed observations of the natural world, his careful documentation of the plants, animals, and ecosystems around Walden Pond, and his commitment to living in a way that was sustainable and respectful of nature, all helped to lay the groundwork for modern environmentalism. Though he did not live to see the widespread environmental movement that would arise in the 20th century, Thoreau's writings, particularly Walden, continue to serve as a touchstone for environmentalists and nature lovers to this day. In the decades since his death, Thoreau's philosophy has continued to inspire those who advocate for the preservation of the natural world. His belief in the intrinsic value of nature, his critique of industrialization, and his emphasis on simplicity and self-reliance are ideas that resonate deeply in a world that is increasingly concerned with environmental degradation, climate change, and the loss of biodiversity. Thoreau's vision of a life lived in harmony with the earth remains a powerful call to action for those who believe that the future of the planet depends on a deeper, more sustainable relationship between humanity and nature. After leaving Walden Pond in 1847, Henry David Thoreau returned to Concord, but his connection to the land and the lessons he learned during his time in the woods continued to shape his life and work. Though he spent much of his remaining years writing and lecturing, Thoreau never fully abandoned the ideals of self-reliance and simplicity that had guided his experiment at Walden. He remained committed to living according to his principles, and his later years were marked by continued reflection, writing, and involvement in social causes, particularly the abolition of slavery. Though Thoreau's time at Walden was over, his engagement with nature continued to influence his work. He frequently took long walks, exploring the woods, rivers, and fields around Concord. Thoreau had developed an intimate knowledge of the natural world during his time in the cabin, and he continued to draw inspiration from his surroundings. His walks through nature were not just an escape from the demands of life. They were a source of intellectual stimulation and spiritual renewal. Thoreau believed that the more he observed nature, the more he could understand about the deeper truths of existence. Thoreau's later years were also marked by a deepening involvement in social and political activism. Though he had long been a vocal critic of slavery, his commitment to abolitionism became more pronounced after the end of his experiment at Walden Pond. Thoreau was not just an intellectual or a writer, he was also a man of action. His refusal to pay the poll tax, which led to his imprisonment, was an early act of civil disobedience that he later expounded upon in his essay Civil Disobedience. But it was his work as an abolitionist that would further shape his legacy. During the 1850s, Thoreau became more deeply involved in the abolitionist movement, giving lectures, writing essays, and supporting efforts to end slavery. He was a fierce critic of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which required citizens to assist in the capture of runaway slaves, and he was unflinching in his condemnation of a government that supported slavery. In his essay Slavery in Massachusetts, Thoreau condemned his home state for its complicity in the institution of slavery. His public stance on slavery became one of the defining features of his later life. Though Thoreau never married and lived a relatively solitary life, his later years were not without personal challenges. His health began to decline in the 1860s, and he was diagnosed with tuberculosis, a disease that would eventually claim his life. His health struggles did not, however, diminish his intellectual vigour. In fact, Thoreau's writing during this period reflected a deepening philosophical engagement with the human condition, nature, and society. He continued to write prolifically, producing works that would go on to become foundational texts in American literature, philosophy, and environmentalism. In his later works, Thoreau continued to explore themes of individualism, self-reliance, and the necessity of living in harmony with nature. His essay Walking, written in 1861, is a prime example of his continued engagement with nature and the idea of a life lived in alignment with one's values. In this essay, Thoreau extols the virtues of walking in the natural world, seeing it as an act of liberation, a means of spiritual renewal, and a way to reconnect with the deepest parts of oneself. For Thoreau, walking was not just a physical activity, it was a way of thinking, a practice of mindfulness, and a path to greater self-understanding. Thoreau's later works also reflect his growing concern with the effects of industrialization on both the environment and the human spirit. As the United States rapidly industrialized in the 19th century, Thoreau became increasingly alarmed by the ways in which technological progress and economic expansion were reshaping the landscape. He was particularly critical of the railroad, which he saw as a symbol of the destructive forces of industrialization. In his essay The Railroad, written in 1859, Thoreau expressed his ambivalence toward the growing presence of trains in the American landscape. While acknowledging the benefits of transportation, Thoreau lamented the loss of the natural world to the march of progress. The railroad, in his mind, was not just a physical intrusion on the land, it was a symbol of the deeper spiritual and moral costs of unchecked technological development. Throughout his later years, Thoreau's commitment to simplicity and self-reliance remained unwavering. He continued to write about the importance of living in harmony with nature, and the need for individuals to reclaim their inner lives from the distractions of the outside world. For Thoreau, the industrialization of America represented a spiritual crisis, one in which people were losing touch with their true selves and with the natural world. His later works continued to challenge his readers to live more consciously, to reconnect with the earth, and to reject the forces of materialism that threaten to undermine human dignity and purpose. In his final years, Thoreau's health continued to deteriorate, but his intellectual pursuits did not wane. He wrote feverishly, completing some of his most important essays and reflections during this period. His health began to fail more rapidly in the early 1860s, and he became bedridden with tuberculosis. In 1862, Thoreau died at the age of 44, having lived a life that was marked by deep thought, moral conviction, and a relentless pursuit of truth. His death came too soon, and the world lost one of its most profound and influential thinkers. Although Thoreau's life was short, his impact on American culture and intellectual history has been immeasurable. His commitment to living deliberately, his advocacy for civil disobedience, and his philosophy of nature continue to inspire people around the world. Thoreau's legacy as a writer, philosopher, and activist has endured because of the universality of his ideas and the clarity with which he expressed them. He believed that a simple life, rooted in self-reliance and a deep connection to nature, was the key to living a meaningful and authentic existence. His time at Walden Pond and his later writings remain a testament to his unwavering belief in the power of individual conscience and the necessity of living according to one's principles. Though Henry David Thoreau's direct influence on politics and public life during his lifetime was limited, his philosophical ideas have had a lasting impact on American political thought. His belief in individualism, civil disobedience, and the need to live authentically in alignment with one's values reverberated far beyond his time, shaping generations of thinkers, activists, and reformers. Thoreau's views on government, resistance to injustice, and the importance of personal conscience continue to resonate in American politics today. Thoreau's most immediate and direct political influence came through his essay Civil Disobedience, written in 1849. The essay articulated Thoreau's belief that individuals had a moral obligation to resist laws and government actions that they believed to be unjust. His refusal to pay the poll tax in protest of the Mexican-American War and slavery was the catalyst for this essay, but civil disobedience went beyond a personal protest. Thoreau argued that active resistance, in the form of nonviolent disobedience, was a powerful and morally justifiable way to oppose oppression and the misuse of government power. Although Thoreau's act of civil disobedience was a personal statement, the essay quickly gained attention from a wide range of thinkers and activists. It influenced key figures such as Mahatma Gandhi, who used Thoreau's principles as a foundation for his campaign of nonviolent resistance against British colonial rule in India. Gandhi famously wrote in his autobiography that civil disobedience was the most powerful piece of writing he had ever encountered. Similarly, Martin Luther King Jr. drew upon Thoreau's ideas during the American Civil Rights Movement, advocating for peaceful protest against the systemic injustice of racial segregation. Thoreau's idea that individuals have a moral duty to resist laws that perpetuate injustice had a profound effect on the broader political landscape. His philosophy of civil disobedience provided a justification for nonviolent resistance, creating a framework for future social movements that would challenge unjust systems, from the fight for racial equality to the struggle for environmental justice. Thoreau's call for moral action through individual conscience was instrumental in shaping the strategies of nonviolent political activism in the 20th century. Another important aspect of Thoreau's influence on American politics is his critique of materialism and his belief in the moral responsibility of individuals to live deliberately. In Walden, Thoreau argued that the pursuit of wealth, comfort, and material success often led people away from their true selves and disconnected them from the deeper meaning of life. Thoreau's critique of the industrialization of America and his call to live a life of simplicity and purpose was a critique of the social and economic systems that valued productivity and profit over individual well-being and spiritual growth. This critique of materialism has had a lasting impact on American political thought, particularly in the realm of environmentalism and the pursuit of social justice. Thoreau's emphasis on the importance of connecting with nature and living in harmony with the earth resonates strongly with the modern environmental movement, which seeks to address the ecological and moral consequences of unchecked economic growth and industrialization. Thoreau's work, particularly Walden, continues to inspire environmentalists who advocate for a simpler, more sustainable way of life that values ecological balance over economic gain. Thoreau's belief in self-reliance and personal integrity also influenced the development of American individualism, a central theme in American political philosophy. Thoreau argued that individuals should trust their own instincts and beliefs, rather than conforming to societal expectations or following the rules imposed by government or institutions. His insistence on personal responsibility and the need to live authentically in alignment with one's values has resonated with generations of Americans who have sought to define their own identities and carve their own paths in life. However, Thoreau's individualism was not rooted in selfishness or isolation. It was a call for self-reliance in the service of a higher moral purpose. He believed that individuals should not only live for themselves but also work toward a more just and compassionate society. His critique of government and social institutions while advocating for individual freedom was a reminder that personal freedom and moral integrity were inseparable from social responsibility. Thoreau's individualism was about resisting the conformity of modern society, not just for personal gain, but in order to contribute to the greater good. Thoreau's influence on American thought extended beyond the realm of politics and into the sphere of literature and philosophy. As one of the leading figures of the Transcendentalist movement, he played a key role in shaping American literary traditions that emphasized the importance of nature, individual experience, and spiritual insight. Thoreau's writing, especially in Walden, helped to define the transcendentalist emphasis on the individual's connection to the divine through nature, as well as the belief that human beings could transcend the limits of society and materialism through personal reflection and moral integrity. In addition to his literary influence, Thoreau's work has been an important part of the American philosophical tradition. His focus on individual conscience, moral responsibility, and the need to live authentically has made him an essential figure in American philosophy. Thoreau's ideas have influenced a broad range of thinkers, from existential philosophers who focus on the individual's search for meaning to modern, environmental ethicists who draw on his belief in the moral imperative to protect nature. His philosophy, rooted in the belief that individuals must act according to their deepest values and conscience, continues to inspire those who seek to understand the role of the individual in society and the moral responsibilities that come with freedom. Thoreau's influence also extends beyond the intellectual and philosophical realms into the practical world of social activism. His advocacy for social justice, particularly his opposition to slavery, informed the abolitionist movement, which ultimately led to the end of slavery in the United States. Thoreau's writings helped to shape the moral discourse surrounding slavery, providing an intellectual and philosophical foundation for the abolitionist cause. His essay, Slavery in Massachusetts, written in 1854, is one of the most powerful expressions of his opposition to the institution of slavery, condemning not only the practice of slavery, but also the government and society that allowed it to persist. In the years following Thoreau's death in 1862, his ideas continued to inspire political and social reformers who sought to challenge the status quo. His emphasis on individual conscience, his critique of materialism, and his call for moral action through civil disobedience provided a moral framework for future generations to engage in social and political activism. Thoreau's influence on the civil rights movement, the environmental movement, and a wide range of social justice causes has ensured that his legacy remains deeply embedded in the fabric of American thought and political activism. As we look back on Thoreau's life and work, we can see that his contributions to American politics and philosophy were not limited to his time at Walden Pond or his writings on civil disobedience. His ideas about nature, individualism, and social responsibility have continued to shape the way Americans think about freedom, justice, and the role of the individual in society. Thoreau's legacy is not just a historical artifact, it is a living, breathing part of the ongoing conversation about the meaning of American life and the moral responsibilities of individuals in a complex and often unjust world. Henry David Thoreau's profound connection to nature and his critique of the industrialization of America have left an indelible mark on modern environmentalism. His most famous work, Walden, has become a foundational text for environmental thinkers, providing a vision of a life lived in harmony with nature that continues to inspire ecological movements today. Thoreau's belief in the intrinsic value of the natural world and his rejection of materialism laid the groundwork for contemporary conservation efforts and eco-conscious living. Thoreau's time at Walden Pond was not only a personal experiment in simplicity, but also a philosophical and ethical stand against the exploitation of nature. He believed that industrialization, with its rapid expansion of factories, railroads, and cities, was fundamentally out of sync with the rhythms of the natural world. As the United States expanded westward and modern technologies encroached upon the natural landscape, Thoreau became increasingly concerned about the environmental consequences of unchecked progress. In Walden, he writes, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived." For Thoreau, living deliberately meant living in a way that respected and reflected the inherent wisdom of nature. Thoreau's critique of industrialization remains relevant today, as the environmental challenges of our modern world are rooted in many of the same issues he addressed in the 19th century. The mass production of goods, the rapid destruction of ecosystems, and the relentless pursuit of economic growth at the expense of the environment are all themes that Thoreau foresaw and critiqued. His rejection of materialism and his call for a simpler, more intentional life resonate strongly with contemporary environmental movements that advocate for sustainability, conservation, and ecological mindfulness. Thoreau's influence on the environmental movement is also evident in the rise of the modern conservation movement, which seeks to protect natural spaces from the encroachment of human development. His writings inspired many of the early conservationists who advocated for the establishment of national parks, wildlife reserves, and environmental protections. John Muir, one of the founders of the Sierra Club and a key figure in the American conservation movement, was deeply influenced by Thoreau's writings. Muir, like Thoreau, believed that nature was not just a resource to be exploited, but a sacred space that offered a deeper spiritual connection and insight into the human condition. In his writing, Thoreau emphasized the importance of immersing oneself in nature to gain a deeper understanding of life. His belief that nature could serve as a moral and spiritual guide for individuals has had a lasting impact on environmental ethics. The idea that humans should live in harmony with the earth and that nature has intrinsic value beyond its utility to human beings is a key tenet of modern environmentalism. Thoreau's belief that nature is not a backdrop for human life, but an active, dynamic force that shapes our experience of the world, has been influential in the development of biocentric and ecocentric environmental philosophies. Thoreau's approach to nature was deeply spiritual. He saw the natural world as a reflection of something greater than human experience, a manifestation of divine order and wisdom. His time at Walden Pond was as much a spiritual journey as it was an intellectual or physical one. In the stillness of nature, Thoreau believed that individuals could gain insight into their own lives and into the larger mysteries of existence. He wrote in Walden, "Heaven is under our feet as well as over our heads." This belief in the interconnectedness of all life and the sanctity of nature has been a cornerstone of environmental thought, particularly within the movement known as deep ecology, which posits that all living beings, not just humans, have intrinsic value, and that human actions should respect the dignity of all life. In addition to his spiritual connection to nature, Thoreau's commitment to environmental stewardship was also deeply practical. Thoreau's writings about his life at Walden Pond, where he built his own cabin, grew his own food, and lived with minimal resources, demonstrate his belief in self-reliance and sustainability. His personal example of living lightly on the land, with minimal impact on the environment, continues to resonate with individuals and communities that strive to reduce their ecological footprint. Thoreau's life at Walden Pond serves as a reminder that living sustainably is not only possible but also fulfilling and enriching. His experiment in simple living, in which he reduced his material needs to the essentials, remains a powerful model for those seeking a more ecologically conscious and meaningful way of life. Thoreau's call for simplicity also echoes in the modern movement for sustainable living, which encourages individuals to reduce consumption, minimize waste, and adopt more eco-friendly practices. Thoreau argued that the cost of a thing is the amount of life you exchange for it. This statement speaks to the way in which modern consumerism often extracts from people's lives, both in terms of time and energy, while offering little in return in terms of spiritual or emotional fulfillment. By choosing to live deliberately, Thoreau sought to find greater meaning and satisfaction in life, and his message continues to inspire those who seek a life less encumbered by the pressures of consumerism. Another area where Thoreau's influence is still felt is in the field of environmental literature. His vivid descriptions of the natural world in Walden have inspired generations of writers, poets, and environmental activists. Thoreau's ability to capture the beauty and complexity of nature with such clarity and insight has made his work a touchstone for those who wish to express their own connection to the earth. His writing has not only shaped environmental literature, but has also helped to define the genre of nature writing, which celebrates the natural world while calling attention to the urgent need to protect it. Thoreau's vision of a life lived in harmony with nature continues to provide a powerful moral and philosophical framework for addressing the environmental crises of our time. From climate change to biodiversity loss, the environmental challenges we face today are closely tied to the very issues Thoreau grappled with in the 19th century: overconsumption, environmental degradation, and the loss of connection to the natural world. Thoreau's message that humans must live more consciously in balance with the earth is as urgent now as it was when he first penned his reflections at Walden Pond. In many ways, Thoreau's legacy can be seen in the growing global movement toward environmental justice, which seeks to address the unequal impacts of environmental harm on marginalized communities. Thoreau's deep belief in the interconnectedness of all life and his moral commitment to resisting injustice align closely with the principles of environmental justice, which advocates for equitable access to a healthy environment for all people, regardless of race, class, or economic status. Today, Thoreau's teachings continue to inspire individuals and movements that seek to create a more sustainable and just world. Whether through the preservation of wilderness areas, the promotion of sustainable farming practices, or the push for renewable energy, Thoreau's influence on environmental thought and action is enduring. His message remains a guiding light for those who seek to live in harmony with nature and to protect the earth for future generations. As Henry David Thoreau entered the final years of his life, his health began to deteriorate, but his commitment to writing, self-reflection, and social change remained undiminished. Thoreau's time at Walden Pond had been a transformative period in his life, but even after leaving the woods, he continued to explore and articulate his ideas on nature, society, and the individual. In the years leading up to his death, Thoreau's writing and public speaking continued to focus on themes of individualism, civil disobedience, and the necessity of living a deliberate life. His later years were marked by a deepening engagement with the world around him, both through his intellectual pursuits and his involvement in the abolitionist movement. Thoreau's health problems began to surface in the late 1850s. He had long suffered from respiratory issues, and tuberculosis, a disease that ran in his family, ultimately took its toll. Despite the physical limitations imposed by his illness, Thoreau remained a prolific writer. He continued to maintain his journal, penning reflections on everything from natural history to philosophy, and he remained committed to the principles that had guided his life. However, his time was running short. Thoreau was keenly aware of his declining health, and his reflections on mortality became more poignant as he faced his own impending death. During these years, Thoreau also became more deeply involved in the abolitionist movement. His opposition to slavery had been a central theme throughout his life, but as the political climate in the United States became increasingly fraught with tension over the issue of slavery, Thoreau's activism grew more vocal. He was an outspoken critic of the Fugitive Slave Act, which mandated that escaped slaves be returned to their owners even if they had reached free states. Thoreau was horrified by the law's injustice and wrote passionately about his opposition to it. His essay, Slavery in Massachusetts, written in 1854, condemned his home state for its role in upholding slavery through the enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act. In his writings and speeches, Thoreau called for direct action and civil disobedience to oppose slavery, offering a moral critique of a nation that allowed such an institution to persist. In many ways, Thoreau's final years were a continuation of the intellectual and moral pursuits that had defined his earlier life. He remained steadfast in his commitment to live deliberately, to write with integrity, and to stand up for what he believed to be right. His work in the abolitionist movement was an extension of his lifelong advocacy for justice and moral clarity. For Thoreau, the struggle against slavery was not just a political issue, it was a deeply moral one that called on individuals to act according to their highest principles, even when it required personal sacrifice or discomfort. Though Thoreau's health was failing, he continued to engage with his friends, especially Ralph Waldo Emerson. The two men had maintained their intellectual and personal friendship throughout their lives, and during Thoreau's final years, Emerson remained a key source of support and encouragement. In many ways, Emerson and Thoreau's relationship was one of mutual admiration. Emerson saw Thoreau as one of the brightest minds of his generation, while Thoreau regarded Emerson as both a mentor and a friend. Even as Thoreau's physical strength waned, his intellectual vitality remained as sharp as ever. Thoreau's death in 1862 at the age of 44 marked the end of a life that had been both rich in intellectual achievement and committed to living with integrity and purpose. Though he did not live long enough to see the full impact of his ideas, Thoreau's legacy would grow exponentially in the years following his death. Walden became one of the most influential works in American literature, shaping the development of transcendentalism, environmentalism, and political activism in the United States. Thoreau's essay on civil disobedience, which had been largely overlooked during his lifetime, would become one of the key texts for nonviolent resistance movements throughout the world. Thoreau's influence continued to expand throughout the 20th century. In the civil rights movement, leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. found inspiration in Thoreau's philosophy of civil disobedience. King's commitment to nonviolent protest and his belief in the moral duty of individuals to resist unjust laws were shaped by Thoreau's writings. Similarly, Mahatma Gandhi's fight for Indian independence was influenced by Thoreau's ideas on nonviolent resistance. Gandhi, who was deeply moved by Thoreau's civil disobedience, saw it as a blueprint for his own campaigns of nonviolent civil disobedience against British rule. Thoreau's environmental legacy also endured well beyond his time. His writings on the importance of nature, the need for conservation, and the inherent value of the natural world helped to lay the groundwork for the modern environmental movement. Figures such as John Muir, Aldo Leopold, and Rachel Carson, all of whom were deeply involved in the fight for environmental protection, drew inspiration from Thoreau's reverence for nature and his call to live in harmony with the earth. Thoreau's commitment to simple living, sustainability, and ecological awareness has made him one of the foremost figures in the history of American environmentalism. Thoreau's ideas about simplicity and self-reliance also continue to resonate in the modern world, particularly in the context of the growing interest in minimalism and sustainable living. Thoreau's rejection of materialism and his belief that true happiness could be found in spiritual and intellectual pursuits rather than in the accumulation of wealth have inspired countless individuals to embrace simpler, more intentional lives. His emphasis on personal reflection, mindfulness, and connection with nature is at the heart of many contemporary movements that advocate for a more meaningful and balanced approach to living. Thoreau's legacy, however, is not just confined to his philosophical contributions or his influence on social movements. It is also found in the way his life and work continue to inspire individuals to examine their own lives, to seek deeper meaning, and to live in accordance with their own highest values. Thoreau's life and writings continue to serve as a reminder that the most profound truths about life can be found not in the accumulation of possessions or status, but in the quiet moments of reflection, in the simplicity of nature, and in the courage to live authentically. Thoreau's legacy is, at its heart, a testament to the power of the individual to make a difference. His life reminds us that each person has the ability to shape the world around them through their actions, their ideas, and their commitment to living with integrity. In this sense, Thoreau's influence remains as vital and necessary as ever, a call to live deliberately, to resist injustice, and to engage with the world in a way that is true to one's deepest beliefs and values. As Thomas Jefferson's life came to a close, the country he had helped to shape was already beginning to grapple with the consequences of his ideas. Jefferson, the architect of the Declaration of Independence, the third President of the United States, and the founder of the University of Virginia, had spent his life contemplating the future of the nation. His intellectual and political legacy would leave a deep and lasting impact on the United States for generations to come, even as his own time on the world stage slowly faded. Though Jefferson retired from public office in 1809, he remained deeply involved in the intellectual and political life of the nation. He spent his final years in the company of friends, scholars, and students at Monticello, where his restless mind continued to search for answers to the questions that had preoccupied him throughout his life. Jefferson's legacy is not merely a product of his public service, but also of his constant striving for knowledge, his relentless questioning of the status quo, and his belief in the potential for human progress. One of the most lasting aspects of Jefferson's legacy is his contributions to American thought, particularly in the fields of political philosophy and education. His ideas about liberty, democracy, and the rights of individuals shaped the nation's early years and continue to influence political debates today. Jefferson's belief in the power of reason and education as the foundations of a just society remains a central tenet of American political culture. Jefferson's vision for America was one of a nation where citizens, free from the influence of a powerful central government, could live and work in communities that promoted liberty, self-governance, and the pursuit of happiness. This vision, rooted in the principles of the Enlightenment, emphasized the rights of individuals and the necessity of a government that was responsive to the needs of the people. While some of Jefferson's ideas, such as his vision of an agrarian republic, have not been fully realized, his commitment to liberty and democracy continues to resonate within the American consciousness. Jefferson's belief in the importance of education is another key element of his legacy. His role in founding the University of Virginia, his advocacy for public schools, and his vision for an informed citizenry underscore his belief that knowledge is the cornerstone of a successful republic. Jefferson saw education not just as a means of personal advancement, but as a tool for the preservation of democracy. His contributions to American education continue to shape the country's educational system today. With a focus on intellectual freedom, scientific inquiry, and the development of critical thinking skills. While Jefferson's political philosophy was marked by a belief in limited government and states' rights, his legacy is also deeply intertwined with the complexities of slavery. Jefferson's status as a slave owner, despite his public statements against slavery, has been the subject of much debate. His failure to fully confront the institution of slavery has led to ongoing criticism of his legacy. Yet Jefferson's words in the Declaration of Independence, particularly his assertion that all men are created equal, continue to serve as a touchstone for debates about freedom, equality, and justice in America. Despite the contradictions between his ideals and actions, Jefferson's impact on American culture and thought is undeniable. His commitment to the advancement of knowledge, his advocacy for the principles of liberty, and his belief in the potential for human progress have left an indelible mark on the nation. Jefferson's legacy lives on in the institutions he helped to create, the ideas he championed, and the nation he helped to build. In the years following his death, Jefferson's contributions were increasingly recognized, both in the United States and abroad. His vision for the United States as a republic of free individuals, governed by reason and guided by the principles of liberty, has continued to inspire generations of Americans. Jefferson's ideas have been integral to the development of the United States, and his intellectual legacy remains a cornerstone of American political thought. Jefferson's passing on July 4, 1826, exactly 50 years after the adoption of the Declaration of Independence, was a poignant moment in American history. He died just hours after his friend and fellow founding father John Adams, who had also played a key role in the founding of the nation. The timing of their death seemed almost symbolic, as if to mark the closing of one chapter in American history and the beginning of another. Jefferson's death was the end of an era, but his influence would continue to shape the country for generations to come. The legacy of Thomas Jefferson is complex, shaped by both his achievements and his contradictions. Yet, his contributions to the founding of the United States, his intellectual vision for the nation, and his enduring belief in the power of liberty and education ensure that his place in American history remains secure. Jefferson's legacy continues to be felt in the ideals of freedom, democracy, and self-governance that form the foundation of the United States. While Thomas Jefferson's contributions to American political thought and governance are vast, one of his most significant impacts was his role in shaping the early structure of the federal government and its relationship with the states. As a staunch advocate for states' rights and a limited federal government, Jefferson's political philosophy shaped the early years of the Republic. His presidency, marked by a commitment to reducing the power of the central government, reflected his enduring belief that the people, not the government, were the ultimate guardians of liberty. Jefferson's concern about the growing power of the federal government was not without basis. He believed that the government should serve the people, and that a strong central authority could easily become tyrannical. This view was shaped by his experiences under British rule, where the colonies had felt the weight of a distant monarchy imposing laws without the consent of the governed. Jefferson's solution to this concern was a government that would be more decentralized, where power would be distributed among the states, and where the central government's powers would be clearly defined and limited. Throughout his life, Jefferson was deeply skeptical of any government that sought to expand its reach and control over its citizens. This belief informed his actions both as a public servant and as a private citizen. As president, Jefferson sought to reduce the influence of the federal government in the lives of Americans, particularly in matters of commerce and taxation. He worked to shrink the size of the military eliminate internal taxes, and reduce the national debt, which he saw as an essential step in ensuring the Republic's stability. Jefferson's administration also witnessed a shift in the nation's approach to foreign policy. He sought to avoid entanglement in European conflicts, focusing instead on diplomacy and peaceful coexistence. His decision to implement the Embargo Act of 1807, which sought to prevent American ships from engaging in foreign trade, was an attempt to protect American interests without resorting to war. While the embargo ultimately proved unpopular and ineffective, it demonstrated Jefferson's belief that the federal government should prioritize the welfare of its citizens over international conflicts. Despite his commitment to a limited federal government, Jefferson also recognized the need for a strong independent judiciary that could serve as a check on the power of the executive and legislative branches. This belief was put to the test during his presidency, particularly in his conflict with the judiciary, which was then dominated by Federalist judges. One of the most notable instances of Jefferson's attempts to shape the judiciary occurred in the aftermath of the 1800 election, when the Federalists lost power to the Democratic Republicans. Jefferson was determined to weaken the influence of Federalist judges, and his efforts to do so culminated in the impeachment of Judge Samuel Chase in 1804. While the impeachment of Chase was unsuccessful, it highlighted Jefferson's desire to assert the power of the executive branch in relation to the judiciary. Jefferson believed that the court should not be above the law, and he sought to ensure that the judicial branch did not overstep its authority. At the same time, Jefferson believed that the judiciary should be independent, free from political influence, and able to serve as a check on the actions of the other branches of government. In many ways, Jefferson's vision for the federal government was shaped by his belief in the inherent wisdom of the people. He was deeply committed to the idea that a government should be responsive to the needs of its citizens, and he viewed the federal government as a tool for ensuring the protection of individual rights and freedoms. Jefferson's idea of government, however, was one that was minimalist in nature. He sought to limit its reach, while still ensuring that it could fulfill its core responsibilities. Despite the challenges he faced in implementing his vision for government, Jefferson's influence on the structure of the federal government continued to shape American political thought long after he left office. His commitment to states' rights and his belief in a limited government helped define the ideological divisions of the early republic. The political philosophy he espoused laid the foundation for the Democratic-Republican Party, which would later evolve into the Democratic Party, and his vision of an agrarian republic continued to resonate with many Americans. Jefferson's relationship with the federal government also extended to his views on the role of the president. While he believed that the executive branch should be strong enough to govern effectively, he also believed that the president should be a servant of the people, not a ruler. Jefferson's presidency was marked by his desire to embody the ideals of democracy, and he sought to avoid the concentration of power in the hands of one individual or institution. Though Jefferson's approach to government and the judiciary was often controversial, his belief in the importance of a balanced government, one that was both responsive to the needs of the people and limited in its powers, remains a cornerstone of American political thought. His vision of a government that is not intrusive but rather protective of liberty has continued to shape the debates around the role of the federal government in American life. As president, Thomas Jefferson faced the considerable challenge of navigating the complex and volatile world of international relations. The young United States, still finding its place on the global stage, was surrounded by powerful European nations whose interests often clashed with those of the new republic. Jefferson's foreign policy was deeply influenced by his belief in American independence, his commitment to neutrality, and his desire to protect the country from the entanglements of European conflicts. One of Jefferson's core principles in foreign policy was the belief that the United States should avoid becoming involved in the wars and disputes of European powers. He sought to maintain a policy of neutrality, believing that the United States, as a young and growing nation, should focus on its own development rather than becoming embroiled in the conflicts of Europe. This philosophy reflected Jefferson's broader vision of a nation that was independent, self-sufficient, and governed by its own principles, free from the influence of foreign powers. Jefferson's commitment to neutrality was put to the test during his presidency, particularly with the ongoing conflict between Britain and France. Both nations imposed restrictions on American shipping, and the British practice of impressment, forcing American sailors into British naval service, was a major source of tension. Jefferson viewed these actions as violations of American sovereignty and sought to respond in a way that would protect American interests without resorting to war. In 1807, Jefferson implemented the Embargo Act, which sought to restrict American trade with both Britain and France, in an effort to pressure them into respecting American neutrality. The goal was to avoid war and force Britain and France to recognize the rights of neutral nations. However, the Embargo Act was largely unsuccessful. It devastated American merchants, particularly those in New England, and led to widespread resentment. The embargo was lifted in 1809, but the damage had been done. While Jefferson's commitment to neutrality was sincere, the embargo proved that relying solely on economic pressure as a tool of foreign policy had its limits. The failure of the Embargo Act did not deter Jefferson's belief in the importance of neutrality, but it did highlight the challenges of balancing idealism with the realities of international power dynamics. Jefferson's foreign policy, despite its challenges, was grounded in a desire to protect the young nation from the dangers of foreign entanglements and to preserve its independence. He sought to avoid the kind of alliances and military commitments that had drawn the country into European conflicts in the past, focusing instead on diplomacy and peaceful trade. Jefferson's presidency was also marked by the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, one of the most significant foreign policy achievements of his administration. The purchase of the Louisiana Territory from France nearly doubled the size of the United States, providing the nation with vast new territories for settlement and expansion. While Jefferson had long believed in the importance of westward expansion, the acquisition of such a large territory presented both opportunities and challenges. The decision to purchase the land was a bold one, as Jefferson had previously advocated for a strict interpretation of the Constitution and was unsure whether the federal government had the authority to make such a large land deal. Ultimately, Jefferson justified the purchase as a necessary step for the long-term growth and security of the United States. The acquisition of Louisiana provided the United States with control of the Mississippi River, a vital trade route, and ensured that the nation would have access to valuable resources and land for future generations. The Louisiana Purchase marked a significant turning point in Jefferson's foreign policy and solidified his belief in the importance of expanding the nation's borders to ensure its prosperity. Jefferson's foreign policy also included efforts to strengthen diplomatic relations with other countries, particularly with Spain and the Barbary States. Jefferson sought to establish trade agreements and resolve tensions with Spain over the borders of the Louisiana Territory. He also focused on dealing with piracy in the Mediterranean, where American merchant ships were being harassed by Barbary pirates. Jefferson's administration took military action to protect American interests and secure safe passage for American ships, leading to a successful resolution of the Barbary Wars. Despite his commitment to neutrality and his focus on avoiding war, Jefferson's foreign policy was not always completely peaceful. The challenges of dealing with European powers, protecting American commerce, and expanding the nation's borders required a delicate balance of diplomacy, military action, and economic strategy. Jefferson's foreign policy, while focused on peace and neutrality, was shaped by the need to protect the United States' sovereignty and ensure its security in a world dominated by powerful foreign nations. Jefferson's vision for America's place in the world was one of independence and self-reliance. He believed that the United States should avoid becoming entangled in the conflicts of Europe and instead focus on building a strong, self-sufficient republic. His foreign policy sought to preserve American neutrality, protect American commerce, and promote peaceful relations with other nations. While the challenges of foreign diplomacy were often daunting, Jefferson's commitment to these ideals left a lasting mark on American foreign policy and shaped the nation's approach to international relations in the years to come. Thomas Jefferson was not only a political leader but also an intellectual and a man of science. His wide-ranging interests and his commitment to the pursuit of knowledge were key elements of his character and legacy. Jefferson was deeply influenced by the intellectual currents of the Enlightenment, a period characterized by a belief in reason, scientific progress, and the power of human understanding. He believed that knowledge and scientific discovery were essential to the advancement of society and the flourishing of a democratic republic. Throughout his life, Jefferson maintained a profound interest in a variety of fields, including agriculture, botany, architecture, paleontology, and astronomy. His intellectual pursuits were not confined to political theory. He sought to understand the natural world and the scientific principles that governed it. Jefferson saw science as a vital tool for the progress of the United States, believing that the nation's intellectual growth was as important as its political and economic development. One of Jefferson's most notable contributions to American science was his emphasis on empirical observation and the study of natural history. He was a passionate collector of books, specimens, and artifacts, amassing a large personal library and a collection of scientific objects. His interest in the natural world was particularly evident in his detailed observations of plants, animals, and the landscapes of North America. As an amateur naturalist, Jefferson corresponded with leading scientists of his time, and his contributions to the understanding of American flora and fauna were widely recognized. Jefferson's contributions to science were not limited to personal study and observation. As president, he worked to advance scientific knowledge and promote intellectual growth in the United States. One of his key initiatives was the establishment of the Lewis and Clark expedition, which was not only a political and territorial endeavor, but also a scientific mission. Jefferson instructed Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to collect specimens of plants, animals, and minerals during their journey through the newly acquired Louisiana Territory. The expedition's findings would contribute to a deeper understanding of the American West and its resources, and Jefferson viewed the venture as a means of expanding the nation's scientific knowledge. In addition to his interest in natural history, Jefferson was also a champion of the idea that scientific knowledge should be shared and made accessible to the public. He believed that the advancement of science required the free exchange of ideas and the cultivation of intellectual curiosity. This belief led him to advocate for the creation of public libraries and institutions of learning, including his involvement in the founding of the University of Virginia. Jefferson saw education as essential to the growth of a free and informed citizenry, and he believed that the pursuit of knowledge was a key component of a healthy and thriving republic. Jefferson's love of architecture also reflected his intellectual curiosity and his commitment to classical ideals. He was deeply influenced by the architecture of ancient Greece and Rome, and he believed that buildings should reflect the values of reason, order, and beauty. As a self-taught architect, Jefferson designed his own home, Monticello, as well as the Virginia State Capitol and the buildings of the University of Virginia. His architectural work was a reflection of his belief that the built environment should be a reflection of the ideals of a republic, promoting both functionality and aesthetic beauty. In addition to his architectural and naturalistic interests, Jefferson was also an advocate for the study of astronomy. He believed that the study of the stars could provide important insights into the nature of the universe and the human condition. Jefferson maintained a personal interest in astronomy throughout his life, and he made several contributions to the field, including his advocacy for the construction of an astronomical observatory at the University of Virginia. He believed that the pursuit of knowledge about the universe could help to elevate the human spirit and foster a greater appreciation for the natural world. Jefferson's commitment to scientific inquiry and intellectual growth was also reflected in his writings. Throughout his life, he corresponded with leading intellectuals, scientists, and philosophers, exchanging ideas and engaging in intellectual debates. His letters, which are a rich source of insight into his thoughts and beliefs, demonstrate his intellectual curiosity and his belief in the power of reason and evidence. Jefferson's letters on science, philosophy, and politics reveal a man who was deeply engaged with the world around him, and who sought to apply reason and scientific principles to all aspects of life. Despite the limited resources and infrastructure available to him, Jefferson's contributions to American science and intellectual development were significant. He played a key role in promoting the idea that a young nation could be a leader in scientific discovery and intellectual progress. His efforts to promote knowledge, education, and scientific inquiry laid the foundation for the intellectual culture that would flourish in the United States in the years following his presidency. Today, Jefferson's legacy as a scientist, philosopher, and intellectual continues to influence the United States. His commitment to the pursuit of knowledge, his belief in the importance of education, and his advocacy for scientific inquiry remain central to the nation's intellectual identity. Jefferson's contributions to American science, though often overshadowed by his political achievements, represent an important and enduring part of his legacy, one that helped shape the development of a nation that values reason, progress, and the advancement of human knowledge. Thomas Jefferson's philosophical beliefs were deeply rooted in the ideals of the Enlightenment, a movement that emphasized reason, individual liberty, and the pursuit of knowledge. These ideas form the foundation of his political views and influence much of his work as a statesman and philosopher. Jefferson's commitment to the principles of liberty, equality, and democracy shaped his vision for the United States and left a profound mark on the country's development. At the heart of Jefferson's political philosophy was his belief in the natural rights of individuals. He argued that all people were born with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that could not be taken away by any government or authority. These ideas were central to his authorship of the Declaration of Independence, where he famously wrote that all men are created equal and that they have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Jefferson's assertion of these rights was not just a philosophical statement. It was a call to action, urging Americans to break free from the oppression of the British monarchy and establish a government that would respect and protect these fundamental rights. Jefferson's belief in natural rights was closely tied to his commitment to limited government. He believed that the government's role was not to grant rights to individuals, but to protect the rights that were already inherent in every person. Jefferson was deeply skeptical of concentrated power, fearing that a strong central government could easily become tyrannical. He argued that government should be as small and unobtrusive as possible, with power distributed among the states to ensure that no one entity could dominate the lives of citizens. This belief in decentralization was one of the cornerstones of Jefferson's political philosophy, and it informed much of his policy as president. Jefferson's commitment to liberty and self-governance was also evident in his advocacy for universal suffrage, at least for white men. He believed that all citizens should have the right to participate in the democratic process, and that a free society required an educated electorate. While his views on suffrage did not extend to women or African Americans, his advocacy for broadening political participation laid the groundwork for future expansions of civil rights in the United States. Jefferson's vision of democracy was rooted in the idea that an informed and active citizenry was essential for the success of the Republic. Jefferson's belief in democracy was also reflected in his views on education. He saw education as a fundamental tool for empowering individuals to make informed decisions and contribute to the common good. Jefferson believed that the future of the nation depended on an educated citizenry, and he worked throughout his life to promote education and intellectual inquiry. His creation of the University of Virginia was one of his most significant contributions to the nation's educational system, and it was founded on the principles of intellectual freedom and the pursuit of knowledge. Jefferson saw the university as a place where students could learn not only the sciences and humanities, but also the principles of liberty and self-governance. Jefferson's views on government and democracy were also shaped by his experiences in the Revolutionary era. The American Revolution, for Jefferson, was not just a struggle for independence from Britain, but a movement to establish a new kind of government, one that was founded on the principles of liberty, equality, and the consent of the governed. Jefferson's role in the drafting of the Declaration of Independence was a direct reflection of his belief in the importance of these principles. He saw the Declaration as not only a statement of the American colony's intention to break free from Britain, but as a universal statement of the rights of all people to live in freedom and to govern themselves. Yet Jefferson's commitment to liberty and democracy was not without its contradictions. While he championed the rights of individuals, he was also a slave owner, and his views on slavery were complex and evolving. Jefferson expressed moral opposition to slavery in his writings, but he also believed that it was necessary for the economic stability of the South. His failure to take stronger action against slavery, particularly in the context of his public support for the principles of liberty, has been one of the most troubling aspects of his legacy. The contradiction between his advocacy for human rights and his personal involvement in the institution of slavery remains a key point of debate among historians. Despite these contradictions, Jefferson's political philosophy left a lasting imprint on the United States. His vision of a republic grounded in liberty, equality, and self-governance shaped the direction of the nation in its early years and provided a framework for future generations of Americans. Jefferson's belief in the importance of education, his commitment to individual rights, and his advocacy for a limited government continue to resonate in the political culture of the United States today. Jefferson's legacy as a champion of democracy and liberty has continued to inspire political movements and ideas throughout American history. His writings, particularly the Declaration of Independence, have become foundational texts for the American political tradition, and his ideas about government, individual rights, and democracy have influenced generations of political thinkers and leaders. Jefferson's vision of a nation grounded in the principles of liberty and self-governance remains a central part of the American story. The early years of the United States were marked by the formation of political parties, a development that was both natural and necessary as the new nation navigated its way through the complexities of governance. At the heart of this political evolution was Thomas Jefferson, whose philosophical beliefs and political actions played a significant role in shaping the Democratic Republican Party, the first major political party in the United States. Jefferson's political ideas, particularly his commitment to states' rights, limited government, and the protection of individual liberties, stood in stark contrast to the more centralized Federalist vision of Alexander Hamilton and the Federalists. These ideological differences would give rise to the formation of political parties, with Jefferson leading the opposition to the Federalists, advocating for a government that was more responsive to the people and less prone to consolidation of power. In many ways, the creation of political parties was a product of Jefferson's vision for the country. The Federalists, led by Hamilton, advocated for a strong central government that could promote economic growth, establish a national bank, and strengthen the nation's military and diplomatic power. Jefferson, on the other hand, believed in a government that was to be more decentralized and focused on maintaining the rights and autonomy of the states. He was deeply suspicious of centralized power, believing that it could lead to tyranny and undermine the very principles of liberty that the United States was founded upon. Jefferson's political philosophy gave rise to the Democratic-Republican Party, which opposed the Federalist agenda and sought to promote a vision of America as a republic of independent farmers, where the federal government would play a limited role in the daily lives of citizens. Jefferson's party emphasized the importance of agriculture as the foundation of the nation's economy, arguing that a nation of independent farmers was the most virtuous and stable form of government. In contrast, the Federalists envisioned an America that was increasingly industrialized, with a strong central government that could support business and commerce. The ideological divide between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans came to a head during the presidency of George Washington, whose administration was dominated by Federalist policies. Jefferson, who served as Washington's Secretary of State, increasingly found himself at odds with Hamilton, who was serving as Secretary of the Treasury. Hamilton's proposals for a national bank, a strong federal government, and policies that favored commercial interests were deeply opposed by Jefferson, who believed that they would concentrate too much power in the hands of the federal government and undermine the rights of the people. The rivalry between Jefferson and Hamilton became more pronounced as the political landscape of the country shifted. As tensions between the two men grew, so too did the divisions within the government. Jefferson's supporters, many of whom were farmers, laborers, and rural Americans, rallied around the idea of a limited government that would allow them to maintain their independence from the influence of big business and centralized power. Hamilton's supporters, on the other hand, were largely concentrated in urban areas and believed in a stronger, more active government that would foster economic growth and strengthen the nation's position in the world. The election of 1800 marked a pivotal moment in the history of American political parties. After a contentious election, Jefferson, the candidate of the Democratic-Republican Party, defeated incumbent President John Adams, the Federalist candidate. This peaceful transfer of power, often referred to as the Revolution of 1800, was a landmark moment in American history, as it demonstrated that political power could change hands without violence or upheaval. Jefferson's victory signaled the triumph of the Democratic-Republican vision for the future of the United States, and it marked the beginning of an era in which the party would dominate the political landscape. During his presidency, Jefferson worked to implement the principles of his party, focusing on reducing the power of the central government, cutting taxes, and promoting an agrarian economy. His efforts to shrink the size of the federal government, reduce the national debt, and eliminate internal taxes reflected his belief that a smaller government would be more responsive to the needs of the people and less likely to become corrupt. However, Jefferson's presidency also revealed the challenges of balancing his ideals with the realities of governing a growing nation. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803, which nearly doubled the size of the United States, required Jefferson to take bold action that was at odds with his earlier belief in a strict interpretation of the Constitution. Nonetheless, the purchase was a major accomplishment and underscored Jefferson's vision for a nation that would continue to expand and grow. In the years following Jefferson's presidency, the Democratic-Republican Party continued to dominate American politics. However, the party began to evolve, and new factions emerged within it. As the country grew and industrialized, the party's agrarian focus gave way to new debates over issues such as slavery, the role of the federal government in the economy, and the nation's foreign policy. These divisions would eventually lead to the rise of new political movements, but Jefferson's influence on the development of American political parties remained profound. The legacy of the Democratic-Republican Party, founded on Jefferson's vision of limited government, states' rights, and agrarianism, continued to shape the United States for generations. Though the party would eventually evolve into the modern Democratic Party, its roots in Jefferson's political philosophy were clear. Jefferson's belief in the power of the people, his commitment to liberty, and his vision of a nation governed by reason and democratic principles would continue to influence American politics for years to come. In the final years of Thomas Jefferson's life, as he retreated to the peaceful surroundings of Monticello, he turned his attention to the legacy he would leave behind. Though he had stepped down from the presidency in 1809, Jefferson continued to be deeply involved in the intellectual and political life of the United States. The years that followed were marked by a quiet but profound reflection on the future of the country he had helped to create. Jefferson's retirement from public life did not mean he withdrew from the nation's concerns. Instead, he remained an influential figure, corresponding with political leaders, offering advice, and continuing to shape the intellectual landscape of the young republic. His letters during these years offer a window into his thoughts on the direction of the nation, the challenges it faced, and his own legacy. One of Jefferson's primary concerns in his later years was the question of the future of slavery. Although he had long criticized the institution, he had never fully acted to abolish it, and by the time of his retirement the issue had become even more pressing. Jefferson's views on slavery were deeply conflicted. He had once believed that slavery was incompatible with the ideals of liberty and equality upon which the United States was founded, but he also recognized the economic importance of slavery to the Southern states. His personal involvement in slavery, particularly his ownership of slaves, placed him in a moral quandary that he was never able to resolve. In his later years, Jefferson advocated for gradual emancipation, but he was never able to put those ideas into practice. Another concern that occupied Jefferson in his final years was the state of the country's government. The rise of political parties and the increasing polarization of American politics troubled him. Though Jefferson had played a key role in the founding of the Democratic-Republican Party, he grew disillusioned with the direction the party had taken after his presidency. He feared that the nation was drifting away from the principles of liberty and self-government that had defined the early republic. In his letters, Jefferson expressed concerns about the growing power of the executive branch and the influence of centralized government, which he had always believed threatened individual freedoms. Despite his concerns about the direction of the country, Jefferson remained hopeful for the future of the United States. He believed that the Republic had the potential to become a beacon of liberty and democracy in the world, though he recognized that the country would need to remain vigilant in order to preserve its founding principles. Jefferson's faith in the American people remained strong, and he believed that the nation's survival depended on the active participation of an informed and educated citizenry. In his final years, Jefferson continued to work toward the fulfillment of his educational vision. His greatest educational legacy, the University of Virginia, was a project that had consumed much of his time and energy in retirement. The university, which Jefferson had designed and founded, was intended to be a place of higher learning that would prepare future generations of Americans for lives of civic responsibility. Jefferson's commitment to education was grounded in his belief that an educated citizenry was essential for the preservation of liberty and democracy. He wanted to create a university that would be independent of religious and political influence, where students could engage with new ideas and challenge existing assumptions. As Jefferson grew older, his health began to decline. He suffered from a variety of ailments, and by the time of his death he was physically frail. Despite his declining health, Jefferson remained mentally sharp and continued to work on projects and correspond with friends and colleagues until the end of his life. His final years were marked by a sense of quiet reflection, as he considered his place in history and the future of the nation he had helped to shape. Thomas Jefferson passed away on July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years after the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. His death on such a significant anniversary seemed like a fitting end to the life of a man whose name had become synonymous with the ideals of liberty and independence. Jefferson's passing marked the end of an era, and his legacy as one of the key figures in the founding of the United States was secure. In his death, as in his life, Jefferson's influence on the United States remained profound. His contributions to the creation of the nation, his vision of liberty and self-governance, and his commitment to the principles of democracy continue to shape the country today. Jefferson's ideas about the role of government, the importance of education, and the necessity of a free and informed citizenry have become central to the American political tradition. Despite the contradictions and complexities that marked his life, Thomas Jefferson remains a towering figure in American history. His legacy, both as a founding father and as a thinker, is intertwined with the ideals of liberty, democracy, and progress that define the United States. His vision for the country, rooted in the belief that the Republic must remain true to its founding principles, continues to guide the nation as it navigates the challenges of the modern world. Thomas Jefferson, one of the most influential figures in American history, passed away on July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. His death on such a significant anniversary was deeply symbolic and marked the closing of an era. Jefferson's passing, occurring just hours after his close friend and political rival, John Adams, further added to the poignancy of the moment. Adams, in his final moments, had famously declared, "Thomas Jefferson survives," unaware that Jefferson had already passed. Jefferson's death marked the end of a remarkable life. He had been present at the birth of the United States, shaping its early ideals and playing a key role in the revolution that led to independence. As a founding father, his intellectual contributions were foundational to the nation's identity, and his political career, including his time as the third President of the United States, left an indelible mark on the country's governance. As news of Jefferson's death spread, Americans mourned the loss of one of their greatest leaders. But his death also prompted reflection on his life, the contradictions of his legacy, and the principles he championed. Jefferson had been an advocate for liberty, equality, and the rights of individuals, but he had also been a slave owner, and his views on race and slavery were complex and at times troubling. These contradictions became the subject of much debate after his passing, as Americans grappled with how to reconcile Jefferson's visionary contributions with his participation in the institution of slavery. Despite the complexities of his legacy, Jefferson's contributions to the formation of the United States were undeniable. His role in writing the Declaration of Independence, his advocacy for the expansion of the Republic, and his vision for a government that was both democratic and limited in power were central to the development of the nation. Jefferson's presidency saw the acquisition of the Louisiana Territory, the expansion of American influence, and the establishment of a more egalitarian political system, which he believed was essential for the survival of liberty. His contributions to education were also significant. As a philosopher and statesman, Jefferson believed in the power of education to shape the future of the Republic. His creation of the University of Virginia, designed to be an institution that promoted intellectual freedom and was free from religious or political control, was a testament to his belief in the transformative power of knowledge. Jefferson's vision for a well-educated citizenry capable of self-governance continues to resonate today, as education remains a cornerstone of the American democratic ideal. Jefferson's death also prompted reflection on the nature of the American Revolution. His writings and ideas were central to the ideological foundation of the Revolution, and his role in its success was pivotal. The Declaration of Independence, which Jefferson had authored, was a declaration not only of the colony's independence from Britain, but also of the universal rights of individuals. These ideals of liberty and self-determination would become central to the identity of the United States, and they continue to inspire movements for freedom and justice around the world. In the years following his death, Jefferson's legacy became a subject of intense examination. Scholars, politicians, and citizens debated the extent to which Jefferson's personal actions aligned with the ideals he espoused. His ownership of slaves, his complex relationship with Native Americans, and his failure to fully address the issue of slavery left lingering questions about the true nature of his commitment to liberty and equality. Yet despite these contradictions, Jefferson's influence on the nation he helped to create remained undeniable. His ideas about government, liberty, and democracy continued to shape American political thought, and his role in the founding of the United States remained secure. Jefferson's vision of a republic that would be based on reason, education, and the protection of individual rights was central to the identity of the United States, and his legacy lived on in the nation's institutions and political culture. In the years after his death, Jefferson's legacy was further solidified by the generations that followed. His ideas about the role of government, the rights of individuals, and the importance of education became central to the nation's development. Jefferson's vision of a limited government focused on protecting the rights of its citizens and fostering a self-sufficient republic continued to resonate through the political debates of the 19th and 20th centuries. His influence was felt not only in the United States but also in the broader world, as the ideals of liberty and democracy he championed inspired movements for independence and freedom across the globe. Following Thomas Jefferson's death in 1826, the United States entered a new phase of its development. Jefferson had lived through the early struggles of the Republic, played a foundational role in its creation, and through his political actions contributed to the shaping of its future. His death marked the end of an era, but the ideas and ideals he championed would continue to reverberate throughout American history and beyond. In the decades after Jefferson's passing, the nation faced significant changes that tested the ideals of liberty and democracy he had espoused. The rapid expansion of the United States, the advent of industrialization, the growth of political parties, and the deepening conflict over slavery were all challenges that Jefferson's vision of an agrarian republic struggled to reconcile. Yet Jefferson's influence on American thought remained central to these developments, even as the country moved in new directions. Jefferson's vision for an agrarian republic, a nation of independent farmers, was central to his political philosophy. He believed that agriculture, rather than industry, was the foundation of a free and virtuous society. Jefferson's ideal America was one where citizens were self-sufficient, free from the influence of large cities and corporations. However, the course of the nation's development, particularly in the 19th century, would increasingly diverge from this vision. The rise of industrial capitalism and urbanization posed a challenge to Jefferson's ideas about the agrarian society, and the growth of slavery in the South further complicated the nation's commitment to his ideals of liberty and equality. Despite these challenges, Jefferson's commitment to individual liberty and states' rights remained a defining feature of American political thought. His insistence on limiting the power of the federal government and preserving the autonomy of the states laid the groundwork for future debates over federalism, which would continue to shape political discourse in the United States. His belief in the rights of individuals and the necessity of a government that would protect these rights continued to influence generations of Americans who sought to balance the power of the government with the protection of personal freedoms. Jefferson's influence on American education also endured long after his death. He believed that an educated citizenry was essential for the survival of democracy, and his creation of the University of Virginia was a testament to his commitment to intellectual freedom and the cultivation of knowledge. In the years following his death, his advocacy for public education, his vision for a university that would be independent of religious and political control, and his belief in the transformative power of education remained central to the development of the nation's educational institutions. The University of Virginia became one of the most important centers of learning in the United States, and Jefferson's vision for a secular intellectual institution of higher learning was realized in the university's emphasis on academic freedom and its dedication to producing well-rounded citizens. Jefferson's influence on education was also felt in the broader push for public schools across the nation, as his belief in the power of knowledge to promote liberty and self-governance continued to guide American educational reforms. Jefferson's legacy also endured in the realm of American foreign policy. Though his presidency had been marked by his commitment to neutrality and avoiding entanglement in European conflicts, his vision for the United States as an independent and self-sufficient nation persisted in the 19th and 20th centuries. Jefferson's belief in American exceptionalism and his desire to keep the nation free from foreign influence continued to shape American foreign relations, particularly as the country expanded westward and sought to assert its influence on the global stage. Jefferson's influence on the nation's founding principles and political culture remained strong throughout the 19th century. However, as the United States approached the Civil War, his legacy became more complicated. The question of slavery, which Jefferson had never fully resolved during his lifetime, came to a head in the 1830s and 1840s. Despite his public opposition to slavery, Jefferson's status as a slave owner and his failure to take meaningful action against the institution left a stain on his legacy. The moral contradictions between Jefferson's advocacy for liberty and his involvement in slavery became a focal point of debate as the nation moved closer to the Civil War. In the years following the Civil War and into the 20th century, Jefferson's vision for a republic grounded in liberty, individual rights, and self-governance continued to influence American political thought. His ideas about government, education, and the rights of individuals were central to the American experience, and they continued to inspire generations of Americans who sought to fulfill the promise of the nation's founding ideals. In modern times, Jefferson's legacy remains a topic of reflection and debate. His contributions to the founding of the United States, his political philosophy, and his role in shaping the nation's institutions continue to be studied and discussed by scholars, politicians, and citizens. Jefferson's belief in the principles of liberty and democracy has been foundational to the American identity, even as the nation has evolved and grappled with the contradictions within his own life. Despite the controversies that have emerged regarding his personal actions, particularly in relation to slavery, Jefferson's role in shaping the United States and his enduring influence on American thought are undeniable. His legacy, shaped by both his achievements and his failings, remains a central part of the nation's history and identity. Jefferson's vision for a free, democratic, and self-governed republic continues to inspire those who seek to build a more just and equitable society. Thomas Jefferson's life was one of remarkable complexity, deeply woven into the fabric of the United States with contributions that have shaped the nation both politically and intellectually. As we reflect on his journey, from his early years as a statesman to his role in creating a government rooted in liberty, to his vision for education and the future of the Republic, it is clear that his legacy is one of profound significance. Jefferson's intellectual pursuits were vast, extending across politics, science, architecture, and philosophy. He was driven by a vision of a nation grounded in reason, self-governance, and the pursuit of happiness. His belief in individual rights, as encapsulated in the Declaration of Independence, continues to serve as a foundational ideal of American democracy. He championed the cause of liberty not only for his time but for generations to come, pushing for an expansion of rights and freedoms that would eventually include many groups who were originally excluded from full participation in society. Yet Jefferson's legacy is also deeply intertwined with contradictions. His outspoken criticism of slavery, while continuing to hold enslaved people himself, leaves an unresolved tension in his life. His commitment to liberty and human equality was marred by his failure to act decisively against the institution of slavery, and his relationship with Native Americans and marginalized groups reflects the limits of his ideals in the context of his personal actions. These contradictions are not easily reconciled, and they remain central to the ongoing discussions of his place in American history. As we consider Jefferson's lasting impact, it is essential to remember that the nation he helped to create was not a perfect reflection of his ideals, but it was a nation built upon the principles of freedom, democracy, and the right to self-determination. His vision, despite its flaws, laid the groundwork for the continued pursuit of equality, justice, and a government that answers to its citizens. His dedication to the idea of a republic where the people hold power, where education is essential for democratic participation, and where liberty is a guiding principle, has shaped not only the early years of the United States but continues to inform the way we understand our political identity today. Jefferson's contributions to education, science, and intellectual development were pivotal in establishing the United States as a nation that values knowledge and progress. His commitment to building institutions of learning, such as the University of Virginia, reflects his belief that an educated citizenry is essential for a thriving democracy. His work in promoting scientific inquiry, fostering intellectual freedom, and advocating for the dissemination of knowledge laid the foundation for the United States to become a leader in education and innovation. The complexity of Jefferson's life, his contradictions, his triumphs, and his challenges mirrors the ongoing journey of the United States itself. Just as Jefferson grappled with the tension between his ideals and his actions, the nation has continued to confront its own struggles with its founding ideals and the realities of its history. Jefferson's legacy serves as both a source of inspiration and a reminder that the pursuit of a more perfect union is an ongoing process. As we reflect on his life, we're reminded of the enduring power of ideas. Jefferson's vision for the United States, though it has evolved over time, remains a cornerstone of the American identity. His belief in the possibility of a republic where liberty, equality, and self-governance flourish continues to inspire citizens and leaders alike. The nation he helped to create, with all its complexities and contradictions, remains a work in progress, one that draws from the best of Jefferson's ideals while acknowledging the flaws that must be addressed. In the end, Thomas Jefferson's legacy is a reflection of the United States itself, a nation defined by both its achievements and its struggles, a nation that continually seeks to live up to the principles of liberty, equality, and justice. His life, his contributions, and his ideas are forever woven into the fabric of the American experience. And as the country moves forward, Jefferson's vision continues to guide us in our pursuit of a more just and free society.